There were broken dishes everywhere, and it was a real mess. The guy pinned the girl against the wall, and she asked him to calm down and behave sensibly. Even though the war was over, the heroine continued to fight this mad dog every day. The girl used her powers, after which the hero calmed down and hugged her. She just sighed and was glad that this time she managed to suppress his attack. This time he managed to calm down a whole 10 seconds faster than last time. However, the hero did not welcome such long hugs, so she pushed the guy away. She couldn't believe that the little puppy in front of her was the same mad dog a second ago. She realized that the guy simply couldn't say what he really wanted. However, unexpectedly, he pulled the girl towards him and asked her to stay with him. It was precisely because of this desire that they were not allowed to get close, because the hero did not speak until asked. The girl just sighed tiredly and hoped that their public appearance would take place soon. Her day began again with the thought of leaving the service forever. She didn't even understand at what point her life became so exhausting. All the troubles started from the day she was assigned this mission. Then the head of the temple called the girl into his office for a talk. In the church hierarchy, the highest clergy were occupied by the 7 sons of God. Behind them came the eminence and holiness, but there was no girl in this hierarchy. She was just an ordinary novice like many other girls. In her youth and naivety, she was filled with happiness and the confidence that she was not worthy of the honor bestowed upon her. And the longer she served at the temple, the more problems arose, and each day became more and more painful. The girl did not have rich parents, and for 7 years she worked herself to the bone. Diana understood that if she had refused then, she would have run away from a lot of problems. However, because of her poverty, she was given all the worst work. And now, although Diana was dissatisfied, she patiently waited for new instructions. She understood that she was not going to get a promotion anyway, even though she tried to resist at first. She rolled on the floor throwing tantrums, but realized that it was better to behave quietly. Therefore, the girl just wanted to quickly find out what she had to do this time. However, she was surprised when she was ordered to help a young gentleman suffering from the severe consequences of the war integrate into society. In her heart, she was simply screaming with rage. This was completely outside the scope of her work. However, she had already been sent to the battlefield twice, and everyone thought that she should have gotten used to it. The girl immediately understood that this was not just about treating a patient. Only those who have been to war know how it affects a person. Simple church ministers healed the bodies and souls of wounded soldiers, but only minimally. When the higher clergy and patrons of the church show interest in something, it means it promises profit. Besides, if they sent an experienced novice, it meant the situation was quite serious. Diana understood that there was no way to expect salvation. If she couldn't cope, all she could do was die ingloriously. The chief assured that all that was needed was to lend a helping hand to someone who desperately needed it. And if the girl dies, then God will grant her endless bliss. If this conversation had taken place 7 years ago, Diana would have obeyed without hesitation. She knew she had no choice but to obey, but she was already an experienced person. If she just agreed, she would be used, and that would be it. So it was necessary to negotiate good conditions. Diana guessed that if she refused, her boss would get into trouble. If they wanted her to risk her life, they would have to promise her a real, tangible reward. Although neither of them said the words directly, they both understood what the conversation was really about. There was a real battle of views between Diana and the boss. No one wanted to give in. The novices themselves were forbidden from accepting money according to the rules of the temple. No matter how hard Diana tried to work more or harder, she didn't become richer. The girl grew up near the temple, so she thought that this was how it should be, and was grateful for the warm bed and food. However, after being exposed to danger on the battlefield many times, her view of the world changed. She realized that no living soul appreciated her efforts, so she needed to take care of herself. If anyone wants to use her again, they'll have to say so outright, or she'll just leave. The boss sighed and admitted that he had been watching the girl for a long time and knew how talented she was. He was sincerely sorry that her efforts had simply gone unnoticed until now. He promised that if everything went smoothly this time, then everyone, even the highest clergy, would recognize the girl's merits. Diana immediately realized that her boss was talking about her possible promotion. If everything works out, she can earn herself a place in the highest hierarchy. That's why she was willing to go anywhere for this. The girl asked who needed to be saved and when she would be able to begin performing her duties. The boss noted that as soon as he heard these words, he immediately believed that Diana could handle it. He ordered the girl to leave immediately and follow the instructions of her escorts. Only after this did the man say that Diana must help the victorious hero, a warrior from the 8th squad. The girl was surprised because she had heard that these people killed indiscriminately, both enemies and friends. Moreover, the boss added that the girl would have to act alone. After that, he wished her luck and ordered her to get the job done quickly. The girl was horrified, only now did she realize how badly she had been fooled. She was still so young compared to her boss and could not compete with him in these games. And so it happened that on that day she suddenly found herself trapped. There she was faced with a problem that she could not cope with. Diana had just recently returned from the war, but she felt as if she was being dragged back into hell. The girl had seen a lot in her short life, so she no longer had tears. She wanted to burst into tears of despair, but she simply couldn't do it. In the recent war, victory was always on the side of the enemies of their state. With each defeat, morale sank, and no one hoped for victory anymore. The war dragged on hopelessly until a special detachment appeared. A few fighters fought like men possessed monstrous strength, and turned the tide of the war. They appeared unexpectedly, won the battle, and also disappeared without a trace. Diana was grateful to these soldiers because she wanted the war to end soon. She agreed, even if it meant that one of her own would suffer. However, at one point everything changed when the saviors began to attack their own, and because of this they were called mad dogs and began to be despised. Thanks to them, the state quickly achieved victory. The detachment was fierce in battle. The emperor's second son, the former commander-in-chief, became a hero, and the detachment was forgotten. They were called madmen. As soon as the war ended, the detachment disappeared. The emperor wanted to reward the heroes with titles and lands, heal them, and prepare them for their return to society. This order was given to the church, but Diana did not believe that she could cope. She still hated her boss for the way he had tricked her. She needed not only to teach the boy to behave like a human being, but also to make a noble gentleman out of him. The girl's companion thanked her for agreeing to come. They both understood that Diana didn't really have a chance to refuse. Laurent was the third son of an aristocrat and an army staff officer. He was a capable man, but after the war he was left with nothing, so he solved the problems of the 8th detachment. Diana understood what awaited her, so she promised to try her best. Suddenly, the young man put his hand in his pocket and then handed the whistle to the girl. He explained that the device was designed to calm nervous comrades in the squad. The girl was curious about how they made him obey, but now she understood. Soon the carriage entered the grounds of the mansion, where the girl was to live in the near future. The house was under guard, and the rest of the servants had to arrive on certain days. Lauren promised to guard her and help remove her body or die for the company. Diana was scared and hoped that the guy would not leave her alone, but he had already jumped into the carriage. Diana was simply abandoned to her fate and left to survive. The guardians told her where to look for the night, after which they let the girl into the house. The first thing Diana decided to do was take a look around this richly furnished mansion. She thought that they would immediately start hunting her, but there was nothing around. At some point, she became so relaxed by her surroundings that she forgot about her task. Before this, she lived in a tiny closet, and her bed resembled a coffin. The girl thought that she would have to live in a terrible kennel with a rabid dog, but the new house was luxurious. She was so immersed in her dreams that she didn't care at all about her surroundings. She cheerfully opened the doors to the room where the night was supposed to be. Only then did she notice the guy sitting in the far corner. The girl tried to behave calmly, because you can't show your fear to a wild animal. The young man behaved extremely aggressively and only bared his teeth at her. Diana carefully grabbed the whistle, put down the suitcase, and moved towards the hero. She couldn't understand whether the knight was sensible because he didn't really say anything. As soon as the girl stopped approaching and stood still, the hero stopped growling at her. She wanted to see how adequate he was before starting work. However, as soon as she opened her mouth and said a greeting, the hero immediately reached out to her. Diana realized that she had made a big mistake when she decided that she could talk to him like a real person. She blew the whistle, which activated the protective spell. When the girl opened her eyes, she saw that the hero was lying unconscious in front of her. She was amazed by such a powerful spell because she didn't know how it worked. Diana hoped that the hero was not too badly hurt by this attack. However, she came to her senses because she was talking to the man who almost killed her. Diana hoped that the guy wasn't pretending to be dead so he could take the opportunity to kill her. And she was worried that because of this accident, she could lose her job and her life. The girl noticed that there were marks on the knight's neck, as if from a tightened rope. She realized it was because of the whistle, even though she felt almost no divine power in the weapon. Diana knew that she had a very powerful weapon in her hands, so she decided to use it as little as possible. After this, she carefully turned the hero onto his back and made sure that he was alive. His muscles were so strong that his head didn't even touch the floor. She lifted the hero up and offered him the first pillow she could find for his head. Although the guy didn't move, he clearly showed signs of life. After this, Diana noticed that the hero's body was covered with wounds. The girl pulled herself back and reminded herself that she couldn't be so kind because she had been deceived. However, she could not overcome her nature and decided to examine the hero's wounds. She opened the guy's shirt and saw that he had a very toned body, all covered in wounds. Diana decided that, solely as an apology, she would do the guy a special favor and heal him. She hoped that he would keep his mouth shut and not blab about her stupidity. Even as a child, Diana noticed that her gift was special, but there was no one to protect her. She hid the gift so that no one would know about it and could not use it. It would have taken an ordinary church minister half a day to heal such wounds, but not her. After completing all the work, the girl became hungry and hoped that there was excellent food in this luxurious palace. She hoped that her charge, a mad dog, did not eat raw meat. However, before the girl had time to come to her senses, the guy came to his senses and stared at her. He stood up so abruptly that he hit the girl in the nose with his forehead, causing her to fall. Although Diana injured her face, she escaped with only a slight fright. The hero tried to cover himself up, as if the girl had behaved indecently. Diana explained that she had merely stretched out his shirt to examine his wounds. Although she was glad that his mind had returned so much that he now felt ashamed. The treatment was not yet over, so she asked her patient to sit quietly. Although at first the hero shuddered at her powers, then he felt better and calmed down. Everyone in the 8th squad was very sensitive, so Diana realized that the sound of her footsteps had frightened the guy. She was confident that with the help of divine power, she would be able to calm the hero. She tried to make her voice as soft as possible so as not to irritate the guy's sensitive hearing. Gradually, the girl tried to get to know her charge, whose name was Kels, better. The guy didn't know who called him that, and in principle, he didn't understand most of her questions. At that moment, the girl's stomach growled from hunger, which frightened the hero. She decided to immediately end the treatment and start looking for food so as not to provoke him. The girl jumped up and hoped to run away, but she could not leave Kels alone. Even though the guy didn't understand much, she gave her the simplest answers. Diana was delighted by this and asked him to wait on the sofa until she brought food. The young man turned out to be very obedient and did everything he was told. Diana realized that it would be easy for her to live in the mansion if she did not provoke Kels. As she left the room, she smelled a fragrant aroma coming from the kitchen. From that moment on, she still had no idea what awaited her in the future. The owner was informed that a church minister had arrived at the mansion and met with the man in her care. Little Sebastian, like his mother, was looking forward to meeting him. Both were curious about what the hero from the 8th squad would become. However, they didn't know that at that very moment the guy's entire dinner was soaked in blood. Diana herself had no idea how great the malice that surrounded the hero was. The girl was sure that Kels would become a wonderful person. "Diana, you've already rushed towards the guy. I hope to remove the poison, even though I've never done this before." She started treatment, but then realized that there was red juice everywhere, not his blood. The girl decided that the guy choked because he was hungry and ate too quickly. She apologized for yelling and scaring him with her voice. Diana could tell from the guy's look that he was furious and was going to kill her. She folded her hands and began to pray that this misfortune would pass her by. She hoped that she would be able to settle down well in heaven after death. However, the hero did not intend to attack her. He only stated that all food is poison. Thanks to his sensitive taste receptors, he realized that the food was poisoned. Although he was unharmed, Diana was glad that she had not had time to try a single piece. She was amazed at the speed at which the hero devoured the food and hesitated. The girl was upset because she couldn't eat anything and she was very hungry. She realized that she would either die of hunger, be poisoned, or be killed by a hungry rabid dog. She needed to remain calm because that was the only way to survive in this terrible situation. The girl made a decision and was going to cook the food herself. She was inspired and determined not to give up so quickly. Diana asked the hero to wait, ran out of the room and went to the kitchen. There she stood frozen in front of a table on which lay vegetables and wheat flour. Diana was confident that even the simplest ingredients would not contain any poison. One of the guards contacted Mr. Lauren, who was supposed to arrive soon. Diana couldn't remember the last time she had even tried cooking. Her only experience was helping around the house before she joined the church. The girl realized that she had never cooked before, so she only knew that vegetables needed to be washed and cut. At the sight of such a cook, even carrots and potatoes were horrified at their fate. Diana was so excited about her cooking that she didn't notice anything. After some time, Lord Lauren literally burst into the kitchen. He was afraid that the hero had killed someone again or even tried to escape. However, Diana ordered the guy to speak as quietly as possible so as not to provoke the hero with his shouting. Besides, she was surprised that the Lord had arrived so early and with all his might. The girl admitted that if the situation had gotten out of control, she would not have called him, but would have simply run away. At that moment, she smelled something burning and decided to check on her dinner. Even the small, cute food Kels caught was better than poison. Initially, Diana tried to cook something from the ingredients she had in the kitchen, but problems arose. The girl spent too long preparing the simple soup, so she was afraid that the hero would go mad from hunger. It seemed a miracle that he remained calm all this time and waited for food. Diana made soup, but she wasn't sure the hero would like it. However, the young man did not react to her words in any way, but only continued to stand silently. Even in such a battered state, he looked like a noble gentleman. However, Diana did not understand why the young hero had a candlestick in his hands. But the next second, when he threw it at the bird, everything fell into place. After that, he only stated that she had prepared food for him for dinner. Just like this bird, Diana's expectations of the young master were destroyed by the candlestick. The girl thought the hero wanted meat, so she cooked dinner again. Lauren was glad that the guys found a common language and hoped that the hero would successfully debut as an aristocrat. Diana understood that the gentleman, in general, did not care what would happen to her. He hoped that the girl would live up to their expectations. All the progress so far was impressive. He hoped that no problems would arise when Lady Charlotte came to visit. Diana's hands shook when she heard this, and she was ready to faint. Lord Lawrence, with a smile on his face, announced that Lady Charlotte and Prince Sebastian would visit her in the near future. At that moment, Diana realized that her whole world had collapsed and her life had flashed before her eyes. The current emperor has had 2 wives throughout his reign, the first of whom died. Then the second one became his lover, but their love did not last long. Soon the emperor became infatuated with another woman, the beautiful Charlotte. Seeing the emperor's love, the people nicknamed Charlotte the Third Empress, despite the fact that the current one was still alive. It was known to everyone that the emperor favored Charlotte and her son Sebastian. So Diana tried to imagine that the emperor's beloved family had come to visit Kelsa. The mere thought of this horrified the girl. She was afraid that she would be executed if something went wrong during the meeting. The emperor loved his family, so he was going to carefully prepare them for the meeting. Although Diana was worried about this, Lauren promised to arrange everything. However, during this conversation, they became distracted and did not notice how the dinner turned into a toxic liquid. Even though the soup looked terrible, at least it wasn't poisoned like the rest of the food. From Laurent's reaction, the girl realized that this happened quite often. The Lord promised to send them fresh produce that was grown by the farmers. Coming closer, Lauren peered into the pot and saw that the soup had taken on a life of its own. He decided that he had become a spawn of Satan and then tried to get rid of him. The food looked so bad that Laurent thought it would be better to give the knight poison. No matter how badly the guy treated the hero, it was beyond his strength. Diana refused to get rid of the food because she had also been starving for a whole day. The boys remembered that in addition to the soup, they also had fried pigeon. However, he looked even worse, so the Lord promised to give the girl a cookbook. The boys were about to get rid of the food when a knight burst into the kitchen. They were frightened by his appearance and froze, unable to move. Even though the soup looked terrible and like it had been given new life, Kels didn't care. He calmly grabbed the food and began to chew it without a drop of doubt. Moreover, the young man asked for more, which meant that the dinner was to his taste. Seeing this state of affairs, the Lord decided that God was really looking after Diana. From Kels's words, the guy learned exactly what poison had been added to their food earlier. The 8th squad was trained to identify poisons and develop resistance to them. Diana realized that their keen vision, hearing, and sense of smell were also the result of this training. The Lord explained that the training only enhanced their innate abilities. All invisible forces were considered divine and controlled by the church. Except for the battle priests, everyone used these powers only to save people. Therefore, Diana suspected that the church was involved in these terrible trainings. The girl wasn't sure if she wanted to know the truth about what happened at the training camp. She reminded that she was just an ordinary novice who did what she was told. Lauren explained that mistakes had been made in the 8th Squad's camp and that there were no losers among the knights. There were many ways to erase a person from memory, as if he had never existed. Although the guy was smiling as he said this, his tone was not friendly at all. Diana immediately realized that she had to stay away from this topic if she wanted to survive. The girl was able to relax only late in the evening when Lauren left. At some point, Diana decided to try her own food, but it turned out to be worse than poison. She decided not to wait for new problems and just run away from the two annoying guys. Only in her room could the girl relax and enjoy comfort. Diana decided not to worry about the man's well-being and just go to bed. She climbed into the softest bed in her life and covered herself with a warm blanket. Although my girlfriend and I didn't really eat, I was hoping to get a good night's sleep. However, she felt some kind of dark energy coming from her back. Diana also jumped up and grabbed her whistle as a weapon. Just seeing the whistle in her hands, Kels immediately calmed down. The girl hoped that she wouldn't have to use it as a weapon against the guy. She knew Kels was only holding back from tearing her to pieces because of the whistle. From his words, she understood that the voice, the steps, the breathing, all of it was too loud for him. The girl was surprised that he explained this to her, after which she apologized. Only now did she realize that they were spending the night at opposite ends of the house. She realized that the guy heard her steps and breathing right from his room. Diana knew Kels was sensitive, but this was too much. Even if she tells him to go to his room to sleep, he won't be able to do it. Diana realized that she wouldn't be able to fall asleep on her own, so she suggested just talking. She hoped that if they talked and relaxed, they would want to sleep again. The girl sat the young man down on a chair and went to make tea. Kels sat so straight he looked like a museum piece. There was still tea on the table from the evening, but it had completely cooled down during this time. Instead, she told Kels not to be surprised, then used her divine powers. The guy immediately thought that she was a combat priest since she possessed this skill. Diana explained that ordinary priests take up their duties after training. Natural-born priests were born with divine powers, they were found and made priests. War priests had special divine abilities and participated in battles. If a person possessed anything other than healing, he was made a combatant and sent to the front without exception. Diana didn't want to die early, so she asked to keep this secret between them. She didn't think Kels would tell anyone, but she was still worried. The guy took the warm tea and immediately drank it all, which scared the girl. She immediately began to heal his throat and mouth, which he had burned. She had just boiled the tea, so it was still too hot for a human. She asked Kels to drink slowly this time and enjoy every sip. Diana was an ordinary novice, then her divine powers were revealed, but she hid her special skills. The girl thought about how Kels had gone through all this training and risked his life. And in the end, after all this, he was left with only a pumped-up and well-defined body. The girl immediately slapped herself on the cheeks to stop thinking about such things. She thought it was all because of the darkness, so she lit a candle herself. However, Kels didn't like this, which Diana attributed to his sensitivity. The girl even suggested that he put out the candle, but the young man did not answer. He seemed a little more relaxed to her now after tea. She wondered what other sounds he heard besides her voice. Kels knew that outside the window 3 birds were jumping from branch to branch, mice were running behind the wall, and the guards were awake. She was amazed that the guy hadn't gone crazy yet with so much noise around him. Now Diana understood why Kels had been so angry recently. The girl naively thought that she could get better if she just covered his ears. But as soon as she reached out to Kels, he immediately became angry. So she immediately pulled her hands back and pushed those thoughts away. Instead, she promised the young man to relax. Diana knew there had to be a better way, so she wanted to do the best she could with her powers. From a conversation with Kels, the girl learned that he only occupied himself with training, sleeping, and eating. That night, after the conversation, Kels calmed down. Diana counted his divine powers and sent him to bed. The girl thought that he was fast asleep, since he didn't come to her anymore. However, because of everything that happened, she could not sleep at all. She couldn't relax, knowing that the guy could hear her every breath. First, she had to worry about being poisoned, and now she even had to worry about breathing. The girl screamed loudly in anger and then fell silent, afraid of angering Kels. She tried to go to the kitchen as quietly as possible and make them breakfast. At that moment, she heard someone talking very loudly outside the window. The girl was terrified that the people below were talking so loudly and did not even realize the danger. She already understood what such carelessness could lead to. Although the men knew that the house held secrets, they had no idea that they were already being watched. They even thought they heard the growl of some animal nearby. Before they had time to think about anything, Kels had already rushed at the troublemakers. Their employers seemed completely unconcerned about whether the workers survived. Diana rushed forward with all her might to prevent the attack. The girl herself did not understand why she jumped out of the window, because she could have simply blown the whistle in the room. But by the time this thought occurred to her, it was already too late. Kels saw the girl fall and rushed to save her. The workers did not understand why the girl jumped out of the window without warning. However, Diana was so angry that she ordered the men to immediately shut up and get away. The men insisted that they were obliged to deliver boxes of food right to the door. Diana was furious and noted that she was saying all this only for their own good. She promised that if the men did not leave immediately, they would face severe punishment. Suddenly, they realized the value of their lives and rushed away. The girl was glad that the workers listened to her and finally left. Only now did the heroine realize that she was left alone with a mad dog. Diana thanked the young man for saving her. However, I realized that he simply reflexively caught something falling and did not calm down. She clung to the guy and literally begged him to let the rest of the people go. The girl was afraid that this wouldn't work and she would have to use the whistle. At this time, she noticed that the guy began to calm down. He was alarmed, so Diana explained that the men had simply brought groceries. She added that they were now safe and the strangers had left. The girl realized that her words alone were enough to calm the mad dog. She realized that he was simply reacting sharply to everything because of his sensitivity and war. It was only thanks to these skills that Kels survived the battlefield and returned home. Diana realized that her task was to teach him to live in peacetime. So she was going to treat him like a human being to help him become one. The girl was glad that she had dealt with the situation thanks to her quick reaction. However, she was not happy that the guards did nothing at all to ensure their safety. The girl explained what had just happened, after which she received a sincere apology. The first thing Diana did was take Kels to her room and ask him to lie down on the bed. Although it took some time, she managed to get the guy to do what she asked. She turned the guy over onto his stomach so she could work on his back. From Kels's words, she realized that the floor was much more comfortable than the bed. Diana realized that this was because he spent most of his time in terrible conditions. She explained that in everyday life he didn't need to be on guard all the time. From this moment on, he needs to learn to relax and make his body softer. Diana noticed that the guy hardly answers difficult questions. All the aristocrats in her life were nasty and vile people. She wanted to make Kels into the sweet and kind man that every girl dreams of being. In any case, Diana realized that she had a long job ahead of her. Kels relaxed and fell asleep, and Diana continued to sit next to him and treat the wounds on his back. As soon as the young man calmed down, Diana decided to get down to dinner. Kels woke up very quickly, so the heroine decided to take him with her to the kitchen. She was going to use it to test the food for poison. And besides, Kels was in a good mood after sleep. She felt a little ashamed to use him as a bloodhound, but the girl wanted to use every opportunity to survive. So she asked Kels to test each ingredient she was going to use one by one. The girl knew that the guards had brought a few more boxes, so they had a lot of food. In addition, Lord Laurent gave them a whole box of cookery books. Diana was upset because, although she could read, she did not understand a word of what was written. Suddenly, Kels became interested in the book in her hands and wanted to take a closer look. However, Diana immediately realized that he was just checking her for food, like vegetables. The girl just grinned at this and invited the guy to take a closer look at her. However, she was shocked to realize that Kels could not read at all. The girl was dissatisfied with the upbringing of these unfortunate children because it was she who had to deal with the consequences. Diana announced to Kels that she would soon teach him to read. The guy was silent for a while, but he wasn't angry and seemed to be thinking about what he had heard. Diana realized that before this he only answered yes or no, so he might not even know what he liked. So now she needs to teach him to understand his feelings, in addition to reading and sleeping on the bed. However, she won't be able to do this unless she feeds the guy soon. The first thing Diana asked the young man to do was cut the onion and carrot into small pieces. He had to cope with this very well, which is why he was taught how to cut up people. As soon as the guy took the knife in his hand, the atmosphere around him became murderous. Diana had completely forgotten that recently this man was considered a living weapon. She moved as far away as possible and was ready to run at any moment. Even the vegetables were frightened by what they were about to face. Kels was skilled with knives and lightning, but he cut through everything that came his way. Diana even decided that she accidentally saw a technique that had not yet come to this world. The girl realized that not everyone can cut into small pieces. She initially thought that Kelso would easily cope with the task, but the guy overdid it. He cut everything too finely, so Diana asked where he had used his skills before. Kels admitted without a second thought that he had treated prisoners and enemy bodies in this way. Only now did the girl realize what the poor vegetables had gone through, so she prayed for them. She decided to focus on cooking, so she called the shots and Kels did the work. After some time, they got a pretty tolerable soup with a pleasant aroma. Diana hadn't smelled anything like this for a long time, so her mouth started to water. She had no idea that the kitchen required so much dexterity, endurance, and strength. The heroine asked the guy what he thought about cooking. She tried to explain to him in simple words what he should feel when he likes something. Diana noticed that when you enjoy something, you want to keep doing it, even if there is no need for it and no one forces you. The girl promised that she would become a better cook in the future when she practiced more. Immediately after this, Kels expressed a clear desire to cook for himself. Although it was a small improvement, Diana felt it was a slight to her own skills. The girl went to set the table and asked the guy to bring food. The stew was delicious, and after the meal, Kels's real socialization began. However, one problem arose that they could not solve even after they learned to speak. Diana named various things to the guy, and he said whether he liked them or not. Diana was disappointed when Kels said he didn't like her. She believed that even dogs show their love to those who care for them. However, Kels was very honest and stated that the girl was too loud. Diana was not surprised by this and understood perfectly well why he felt this way. She was on the verge of death several times during the night because she snored and ground her teeth in her sleep. She couldn't sleep normally anyway, and now she was worried about it too. Although she hadn't been snoring or creaking due to pain lately, she was still too noisy. The boy learned quickly, although Diana had not yet figured out what to do with his increased sensitivity. He looked ready to make his high society debut, judging by the way he ate his steak. However, Kels could barely stand the noise, so he definitely wouldn't be able to stand the sounds of the ball. Diana tried to explain that she was not his enemy and that she needed to breathe to live. However, Kels's look suggested that he wasn't that concerned. Continuing these questions, the girl found out that the guy didn't like any animals at all. Not only animals, but all living things in general irritated him. She felt this attitude because she understood that there would be problems with this. She was so offended by him that she declared that from that moment on she would stop breathing. Diana hoped that one day she would live to see Kels confess his feelings for her. They were silent for a while until the wind blew the leaves into the room. Diana hoped that the guy would not fight at least with this leaf, which disturbed their peace. She saw the irritation on Kels's face and reminded him what he needed to do to calm down. The girl helped the guy take a few deep breaths to calm his heartbeat. She praised him for being able to control himself better now. Kels knew that this woman always made sounds when she moved or was fast asleep. But with her he felt something he had never felt before. It was nothing like the feeling of having everything taken away from him and being thrown into an endless void of medicines and spells. There was no need to get rid of these sounds and noises. They did not threaten him. The young man sat quietly and watched the birds that landed on the windowsill. While Kels was relaxed, Diana was on the verge of a breakdown. She had already lost track of time as she sat there without making a sound, her legs going numb. She thought that if she served him as a maid, Kels would become more noble and start giving orders. Suddenly the girl realized that she shouldn't be a maid at all. Noble society is based on hierarchy, and she was the daughter of a baron. Besides, Kels himself wasn't even officially a nobleman yet. Since she actually came from a noble family, she did not need to speak to him respectfully. Diana was surprised that Kels didn't seem to care at all. He didn't give a damn about statuses, and he didn't mind being addressed freely. The guys agreed that from now on, Diana would speak to him informally. However, this turned out to be even more awkward than she had felt before. Besides, the girl had absolutely no idea how to address the guy now. She thought about it a lot and decided to just call him by his first name. It was unknown what the problem was, but Kels reacted with irritation to it. Diana once again thanked the guards for their help. The guys were sincerely worried about the young hero and asked about his well-being. The guards thought Kels was a young lord who was having violent fits due to neurosis. She played out before them the image of a saint, to whom nothing brings more joy than the opportunity to help those in need. The guards were impressed and literally begged the girl to bless them. A blessing is a simple touch with a grain of divine power that simply gives a little extra energy. And yet, people considered the chance of obtaining even a fraction of divine power to be 1 in a million. Even on the battlefield, they did not look for tired priests to ask for a blessing. This was not the first time this had happened, and Diana knew what to do, so she immediately agreed. With a slight smile on her face, she stated that the blessing only cost 20 silver coins. The guards clearly didn't expect that they would have to pay for this service, which wasn't the first time. Diana was not going to give in because the more she insisted, the more they believed her. This power was given to her by God for the whole world, but she could only help those who stood right in front of her. Therefore, if she blesses them, their money will go to helping other people in the world, which is what the Lord would want. The boys easily believed that these 20 silver coins were the will of the Lord himself. Even delirium became the will of God when it was pronounced by a priest. The ministers had a large workload and low salaries, so it was just possible to earn a living. After a short introduction, the guards happily agreed to pay this tribute. Diana was not a woman like the other priests, so she even expected a discount from the guys. Hearing this, they happily took out the bag of money and were ready to part with it. After this, the girl calmly blessed them and wished them luck in all their endeavors. Although she didn't give much, Diana used real divine power, unlike some. If security guards feel better, they will become more confident and attractive, which will ultimately help them in their personal lives. The boys were so inspired by what happened that they promised to always be grateful to the Lord and not to miss the service. Diana had risked her life working in this house, so she felt she deserved at least this. After all, just yesterday she almost died again because of some stupidity. It all started when she told Kels she would address him informally. The girl didn't understand why the guy forbade her to call himself by his first name. She soon realized that he was simply not used to hearing his name. The girl guessed that this was the first time he had been called that, and that was why he felt strange. The guy didn't like sitting on the bed, so he got up and sat on the floor next to her. Diana promised to call him by his name more often, so the guy will have to get used to it. He clearly enjoyed hearing his name, so he even laid his head on her lap. It was such a funny situation that Diana couldn't help but laugh. She immediately realized her mistake and immediately shut her mouth. The girl didn't want to get on the guy's nerves with her laughter. However, instead of anger, she was faced with only even more sweet and unusual behavior. Kels touched his finger to her face and asked her to repeat what she had just done. From all this, Diana realized that he really liked her laughter. However, it was very difficult to laugh when someone told you to do it. From the hero's expression, she realized that the forced laughter did not suit him. Diana explained that if he wanted to fit into high society, he too needed to learn to laugh. Kels was very focused and was clearly thinking about her words because he was not ready to make sacrifices. All this was so difficult for him that steam even came out of his head. She realized that the guy had never laughed before, so she had to start from scratch. She decided to just cheer him up because it worked even with children. However, instead of laughing, Kels only repeated her pose and did not understand anything. Diana thought that teaching the boy to smile and laugh would not be difficult, since everything depended on the facial muscles. However, every time she thought about the life he had led before, she was simply at a loss. She wasn't sure she could go in with people who had lived normal lives as if nothing had happened. Diana had to ensure his successful debut in high society anyway, and the rest was unimportant. It wasn't her problem, so she wanted to concentrate on what she had to do now. Diana walked into Kels's room and announced that they would have laughter practice today. However, before she could do anything, the guy picked her up and carried her out to the balcony. Without any ulterior motive, he simply jumped down, holding Diana by the waist. Only now did the girl see that they were rushing straight towards Mr. Laurent. The young man fell down from fright and for some reason tried to raise his appearance. He hoped that if he did this, no one would show interest in him. Diana was disappointed with his behavior because the guy infuriated Kels. She was scared when the hero suddenly grabbed her, but it wasn't the first time. She gently patted his chest and asked him to breathe deeply to calm down. Lauren watched him and thought the boys were being incredibly sweet. She scolded the gentleman for not making his presence known, as it could have ended in bloodshed. However, Lauren knew that the guy should have felt it as soon as he walked through the gate. He noticed that Kels had become more balanced and the girl more experienced. Diana was happy because she had just been praised for a job well done. She was glad that someone appreciated the results of her hard efforts. The girl said that she really did everything possible, putting in her faith, soul, and body. These were sincere efforts that cannot be replaced by anything. The Lord did not immediately understand that she was hinting at an appropriate reward. With a smile on his face, he announced that he had come so early because he wanted to give the girl a book. Diana didn't understand why she needed to learn the basics of etiquette for an audience with the imperial family the day before. She realized that this headline certainly did not bode well for them. Lauren was cheerful, however, because this was news that needed to be celebrated. He informed the girl that Prince Sebastian and Lady Charlotte were planning to visit them the very next day. Diana tried to say that it was impossible, but Lauren didn't listen to her. Although not directly, he said that he could no longer cancel the imperial family's visit. The girl was frightened by what was happening, and the Lord tried to calm her down as best he could. Although they knew it was difficult, they believed they could do it. Diana believed that execution due to a quarrel with the imperial family after a successful return from the war would be absurd. She believed that caring first about what you like, your things and your life is instinctive. However, he had absolutely no instinct due to the strange training in the squad. The girl explained to the guy that he, like everyone else, only had one life, which needed to be protected. Even though he didn't understand, he had to remember her words at the right moment. She thought it was too cruel that no one had said these obvious words to him because they thought he wouldn't understand them. The practice of laughter was postponed because tomorrow Kelsa was supposed to be greeted by members of the imperial family. However, now they had an important mission to accomplish. The first thing they had to do was to put the house in perfect order and do a general cleaning. If they show this dirty mansion as it is, they will definitely lose money. The guests will only be studying in the corridor, so it was important to keep it in perfect order. The housework was supposed to be handled by other people, but Kels and Diana divided the floors between them and set about cleaning. As soon as the maids began sweeping the floor, Kels would become enraged and frighten them with his appearance. Previously, the lack of help around the house did not bother the girl. Diana understood that the entrance needed to be washed first because no one would go any further. The girl calmly cleaned and thought that the imperial family would break into their home tomorrow. She decided that she was born with a steely psyche, having survived the war and Kels's training. However, the girl had no intention of becoming even stronger. She just wanted to enjoy this life. She figured it was because Kels was a quick learner, so she could relax. Suddenly, Diana caught herself thinking that she hadn't explained to the guy what cleaning was. She also dropped everything and rushed to the hero, afraid that he had done something bad. She was afraid that he had started to tear off all the wallpaper or wash the paint off the painting. In search of her charge, the girl went up to the second floor and was stunned. Everything around was so bright that she even went blind for a while. She saw Kels washing the floor even under the carpet. The girl decided to teach the hero wisdom and told him that he only needed to control visible places. She reminded them that they needed to achieve maximum visual effect with minimal physical effort. In reality, it was just a show of cleaning, so it was necessary to conserve your energy. Kels realized that cleaning was actually a battle with dust. Diana explained that one could first deal with the visible dust, as if targeting an enemy commander. Such comparisons were perfectly clear to the hero, and he immediately pulled himself together. After a long night, the long-awaited day of the imperial family's arrival arrived. Although they were ready to receive guests, Diana looked very strange. The cleanup was completed fairly quickly, thanks to Kels's superior physical abilities. The girl knew that if he took up professional cleaning, success awaited him. Once they had finished cleaning, she decided it was time to move on to the next mission. Lord Laurent has given the most recent version of the etiquette training book in recent times, and it is out of date. However, Diana was not worried because all the etiquette for addressing members of the imperial family was in her head. In preparation for the aristocrat's visit, she also received thorough etiquette training. She wanted to get first place for her etiquette knowledge and a bonus, so she trained as hard as she could. For starters, she decided that all Kels needed to do was look at her and repeat. She ordered him to keep his back straight and spread his shoulders wider. He then had to greet the imperial family, gracefully describing an arched line with his shoulders. Without any delay, he perfectly repeated everything she showed him. He did it so well that Diana was even blinded by the grace of his movements. Kels emitted a golden light that only veteran priests who had survived 10 years of dealing with the emperor and the aristocrats could emit. The girl didn't understand how the person who was doing this for the first time today had greater skill than her. However, the guy infuriated her even more when he admitted that it was a very light movement. So, thanks to Kels, who did a perfect job with his cleaning and etiquette, the cleaning was a success. However, Diana still had to keep an eye on the guy and control him until the guests left. The girl reminded herself that about 98% of those present on the territory of this mansion were just small animals. All the preparations were going well until Kels went out into the yard, where he was distracted by all the extraneous sounds. The guy heard every movement of the wind and everything that moved within a kilometer radius. Just yesterday, Diana was running around all the time and begging him not to do anything wrong. She did her best to ease the boy's anxiety, but time was too short. It was because of this running after the mad dog that the girl now looked so unkempt. She consoled herself with the thought that at least she would be able to demonstrate Kelsey's improvements. She decided to show her suffering, hoping that everyone would understand her situation and give her money. The girl knew that Charlotte would clearly want to have a hand in changing her body in order to use it further in the police. As soon as the carriage carrying the aristocrats arrived, Diana and Kels were ready to greet them. There was no etiquette clause regarding greeting from a close distance, so Kels kept his distance. Diana was looking forward to meeting Charlotte, who was to become her backup source of money. She was so stunned by Charlotte's beauty and noble appearance that she could hardly stay on her feet. Diana and Kels gave Charlotte and her son a formal welcome, as befits a royal couple. The aristocrat was struck by the girl's appearance and was afraid that something had happened to her. Diana began to talk in a veiled manner about how much effort she puts into serving the Lord. She played her role well, and recent injuries only helped her in this. Charlotte was impressed by this performance. Her heart was breaking from the girl's efforts. The little prince agreed with his mother and praised the priestess for her work. Diana was surprised by his appearance because she thought that the third prince was just a child, but he looked like an adult. Charlotte had such a young face that it seemed as if the two were just brother and sister. They were very similar. When the prince moved, his eyes and hair glowed with different colors, proving his descent from the imperial family. However, the boy was curious as to why the war heroes were standing so far away from them. Diana lied that if she got too close, Kelsey's ears would explode due to sensitivity. It's been a while since the guy returned from the battlefield, so he needs to rest. Diana was glad that the prince understood the situation and did not insist, otherwise a disaster would have happened. Instead, the girl offered to show the guests the mansion where Kels lives. There were no problems so far, and all they had to do was follow the route they had rehearsed with Kels beforehand. This is what Diana thought until the arrow, having cut her cheek, pierced the carriage. First, someone started screaming loudly, and then a real madhouse began. All the guards immediately surrounded Charlotte and the little prince. However, Lord Lauren was more worried that all this fuss would cause a big problem. Diana acted on instinct and immediately rushed after Kels. The girl understood perfectly well that she had to stop the hero. Charlotte and the prince had accompanying knights, so Diana did not worry about them. The girl was unhappy that she had let Kels out of her sight again. The guards tried to stop her, but Diana only yelled at them. When the members of the 8th Squad are ready for combat, the Allies maintain a safe distance of more than 300 meters. If Kels had simply caught the criminal, there would have been no reason to run and stop him. The problem was that after capturing and killing the enemy, he was in an excited state. So much so that it didn't matter to him whether the person standing in front of him was an ally or an enemy. She promised to deal with the guy and asked everyone else to come back and remain calm. As soon as the girl finished speaking, heartbreaking screams were heard from the forest. Diana herself was very scared, and the girl immediately grabbed the whistle. Lauren didn't understand why she hadn't whistled at him yet, or why she had run away in the first place. However, Diana herself was now unsure of what she was going to do. Instead of using the whistle to immobilize Kels, she ran straight at him. The girl decided to trust her intuition and grabbed the guy, pressing herself against him. She wrapped her arms and legs around his body, as if she were climbing a tree. But even so, Kels continued to move forward, ignoring her. Lauren was worried about the girl and literally begged her to use the whistle. Diana posed a threat, but she still pulled herself up and covered Kels's ears and face with her body. She used her divine power and begged him to breathe and calm down so that she could survive. Kels ignored her and suggested they run, causing concern. In his head, he was in the middle of nowhere, and his only desire was to kill. He was going to get rid of any obstacle that would appear in his way. And it was into this darkness that Diana's voice broke through with its cries and pleas. Kel stopped, though he could still clearly sense everyone around him. Diana noticed that her words helped and carefully let go of the guy. She wanted to look at his face, but Kels only pressed closer to her, listening to the beating of her heart and calming down. A major incident involving the imperial family had occurred, and something had to be said to diffuse the situation. However, when Diana and Kels returned, completely covered in blood, they were surprised. Charlotte, with a smile on her face, noted that the priestess had handled a more difficult job than she had expected. The blonde noticed that attempts on life were happening all the time. The girl admired God's endless love and mercy, and doubly admired the mercy shown by Diana. She was struck by her words, but outwardly she showed only the ideal image of a priest. She was a master of caring for the image of a holy person who selflessly sacrificed her body. Charlotte did not dare interfere with God's work, but she wanted to help in any way she could. Although Diana was glad that everything ended this way, she was very tired. She was grateful for the help, but she was so tired that she didn't even think about asking for a reward. The boy was delighted by the hero from the 8th Detachment, who put on a performance in the forest. The prince promised that he would look forward to seeing them at the next banquet. Although Diana was not surprised by his words, she did not show it. Charlotte explained to her son that making his debut in Soviet society was not an easy task. Although everyone was skeptical, today she saw that everything was better than she expected. Charlotte believed that one day the time would come when she would be able to talk to Kels. Diana, who was not accustomed to such communication with aristocrats, looked at the girl's outstretched hand in surprise. She immediately used the rest of her own dress to wipe away the blood. Charlotte admitted that it was a great honor for her to touch the novice's hand. Diana was amazed by the courage of the girl, who had never been on a battlefield, who without hesitation grabbed the hand covered in blood and flesh. However, she completely forgot about it when, through the touch of her hands, she felt the presence of divine power in Charlotte. Although the girl was shocked, she did not show it and calmly let go of his hand. Charlotte was pleased that the case was being handled by a capable priestess with whom she hoped to collaborate in the future. Diana knew that divine power was a mysterious ability that could not be seen or measured. Few people have it, and even fewer have a power level so high that it can be simply felt. Therefore, it happens that a person lives and dies without even suspecting that he possessed divine power. When the girl showed her power, it felt like it was simply impossible not to notice. Therefore, Diana realized that the Emperor's woman was deliberately hiding her capabilities. Charlotte noticed the girl's gaze and smiled at her, hoping to see her soon. The heroine didn't care about the Imperial Games, so she preferred to simply forget about it. She bowed politely and wished the guests a safe journey. But she still decided to be careful with the Emperor's woman with divine powers. Moreover, this woman showed obvious interest in the member of the 8th Squad that Diana was caring for. She felt as if she was following a predetermined path or a script written by someone. Kels was suspiciously calm and behaved well for the rest of the meeting. Diana got the impression that the guy was sleeping standing up, which was not surprising since she had released enough divine power to stun him. Immediately after the important guest left, Diana took Kels to his room, sat him down and asked him to wait a little. After all, now she had to explain to the Lord why she had not used the whistle. Lauren pointed out that they could have gotten into big trouble because of her. Charlotte, the third prince, and everyone else there could have been torn to shreds. However, she stated that if they want to make a human out of a body, then they need to treat it like a human being. Besides, the girl was confident in the guy, even though she looked too confused at first. And yet she had no doubt that she could stop him. Lauren gave in, because if someone who was face-to-face with Kels every day said so, then he believed her. After a private conversation with the boss, collecting the body parts and writing a report, the guy died of exhaustion while conducting a secret investigation. After that, he got ready to leave, since everyone was not very tired today. Although he said to make a human out of the body, he actually considered it as such. The realization of his true nature made him feel sick at heart. Although the Lord was only following orders, he could not understand the man's intentions. After talking with Lord Diana, barely able to move her legs, returned back. The girl was completely exhausted, but she understood that she needed to get Kels back in order. She already knew that the best way to interact with him was by giving him various missions. So now his first priority was to wash himself thoroughly. Diana sat the guy in the bathtub, hoping that he would be able to undress and wash himself. After that, she went to her room to also take a bath and get rid of all the dirt. After she left, Kels followed her orders and began to undress. The guy saw the bath accessories and wanted to use them, but he couldn't do it. Everything around seemed soapy, slippery, with an overly mild smell. Everything was so fragile that it could break from the slightest push. It seemed completely useless in the war, but Diana's words haunted him. The guy was irritated by absolutely all sounds, so he wanted to turn them all off. The first thing he did was use cold water to wash the blood off himself. Kels realized there was only one sound he was happy to hear. He realized that he wanted to listen to it again and again and never stop. Unable to contain himself, the hero left the room in this state and headed towards the source of the sound. Diana lay in the bath and enjoyed the warm water and the scent of cleanliness. The girl hadn't bathed without rushing for a very long time when she could have enjoyed the process. She wondered how many members of the 8th Squad had been presented to the priests for training. Kels was very diligent, so she thought they had the best chance. She decided not to think about others and to rather enjoy her free time. The girl didn't even know what awaited her in the near future, but she certainly didn't expect Kels to appear. When the guy came into her bathroom, she realized that she was standing in front of him completely naked. Because of everything that happened, Diana screamed so loudly that her screams were heard even outside the mansion. The girl threw the tub in Kels's face, ordering him to close his eyes. Even though it was slow, for some reason the hero felt like he was going to miss this blow. The guy heard the girl's heart literally screaming with excitement in her chest. The knocking was so loud and frequent that his ears started bleeding. Only now did Diana realize that her scream could have provoked her own death. She stated that Kels should have knocked first and that it was not okay to open the bathroom door suddenly when someone was in there. Even though the guy walked towards her with his eyes closed, the girl still jumped into the bathtub to hide. The hero stopped next to her and admitted that he liked it when the beating of her heart was heard close by. Diana realized that this was the first time Kels had said he liked her without her even asking. She considered this impressive progress and would have praised the guy in any other case. However, they were not in a situation now where praise would be appropriate. The girl remembered that she had to speak directly to Kels and then ordered him to go away. Even though the guy wasn't happy, he left her bathroom and closed the door behind him. When he left, Diana realized that a leisurely swim was out of her reach. It seemed like Kels had become stable since he could tolerate his heart beating. After some time, when Diana had tidied herself up, she went out to deal with Kels. The girl tried to focus and look straight ahead and up without lowering her gaze. She realized that the guy looked amazing, even though she had seen many male bodies on the battlefield. And after the bath, he looked incredible, which promised him success with women in the future. Looking at Kels, Diana noticed that he hadn't washed himself very thoroughly. It seemed as if the guy had simply doused himself with water and immediately walked out. Diana was irritated that the man in charge of the 8th Squad didn't even teach the boys how to wash. Although it was clear that no one expected their successful return, so no one thought about hygiene. However, Diana was irritated that she had to solve this problem once again. The girl ordered Kels to wrap himself in a towel and not to drop it under any circumstances. Kels heard her heart pounding loudly and saw her unsteady gait, so he decided that she was ill. When Diana entered his bathroom, she saw the mess he had made. It became clear why the hero looked so dirty even after the bath. She explained that if Kels turned the tap to the left, hot water would flow, and if he turned it to the right, cold water would flow. After this, you need to touch the water and adjust the tap so that the temperature is suitable. Seeing the guy's reaction to the water, Diana realized that something was wrong with him. However, he couldn't really say anything. He simply didn't like anything. Diana tested the water and realized that it was just the perfect temperature. However, in such water, the guy's senses were dulled and he could not prepare for an attack. Then Diana realized that it was not a matter of preference, but of adaptation, just like sleeping on a bed. She explained that these are normal sensations when the body relaxes. On the field, the guy was constantly tense, so he didn't know how to relax. She hoped that once he got used to baths, the skills would fade into the background. Diana decided to wash Kels's hair and asked him to close his eyes so that the foam wouldn't get into them. However, in this state, Kels was very nervous because he could not control the situation. Whenever he opened his eyes even a little, they immediately began to sting violently because of the soap. Therefore, the girl tried to finish this procedure as quickly as possible. After rinsing off all the foam, she realized that Kels had a damn attractive face. There was not a single flaw on it, although it was absolutely useless on the battlefield. Every time the guy relaxed too much, he would immediately shudder and return to his normal state. Diana then explained that it was essential to wash your hands and remove dirt from under your nails. The girl added that if Kels doesn't want other people to wash him, he should learn to do it himself. She ordered to thoroughly soap all parts of the body, rinse everything with water, and then dry off with a towel. She knew that to make a man out of a guy, you need to treat him like a human being. However, she got the impression that she was aiming for something grandiose. Before leaving, Diana ordered the guy to be sure to put on a robe after the bath. Only when he was alone in the room was Kels able to lean back on the edge of the tub and close his eyes briefly. However, even after the guy washed himself and put on a robe, they still had a small problem. Diana was amazed that the guy wanted to stay in a room that looked very pink. She didn't understand why he wanted to sleep here, since before he needed a white room without unnecessary irritants. However, he has now stated that his preferences have changed. Although the guy insisted on it, the girl knew that he himself was not sure. In any case, she wasn't going to dissuade him, because the main thing was that he slept on the bed. He even agreed with her noise, because the girl's room was right behind the wall. Diana remembered how he had recently come to her, because her breathing was preventing him from sleeping at the other end of the house. Therefore, the girl was sure that nothing good would come out of this. She believed that there were many rooms in the house that looked much better and were more conveniently located. Since it was too early to go to bed, she decided to look for a room for Kels. However, none of them were to the taste of both him and her. Kels remarked that if he didn't stay to sleep in this room, he would go sleep on the roof. He confidently walked towards the bed, sending the girl to sleep with him. For a long time, Kels lay on his bed, surrounded by toys, listening. Right behind the wall, Diana was snoring, making a huge amount of noise. Even though it was noisy, the guy liked listening to the sound of her breathing and heartbeat. Their training continued, and soon Kels learned to wash himself as well as a normal person. Yesterday, the guys were so tired that Diana simply dried the guy out with the help of divine power. So today she promised to teach him to wipe himself like all ordinary people do. The girl was happy with the work done and believed that if the guy changed his clothes, then they could go to the appointment. Although Kels's face was expressionless, he liked this behavior. However, Diana did not understand the meaning of his words and decided that he just liked being clean. The girl suggested that they quickly dry their hair and go have breakfast. The first thing she asked the guy to do was to close his eyes, because if hair got there, it would be unpleasant. After that, she carefully placed the towel on his head and began to rub. Kels knew you couldn't close your eyes unless you wanted to die. The key to surviving on the battlefield is to always be alert and keep your eyes peeled. The 8th squad had to die. He understood this, but he did not want to follow this order. He was afraid to even sleep normally, so he kept his eyes open until the very end. He didn't want to die at all, so he just did everything he could to survive. It had been like that before, but now everything had changed, and he could calmly close his eyes next to Diana. The girl promised that the hero would feel better as soon as he got used to all these procedures. The nobles had servants do all this, but Kels didn't like being touched, so he had to do everything himself. The guy was still afraid to close his eyes. The longer they were closed, the more afraid he became. However, next to Diana, he felt that the feeling of fear was leaving, and he felt calm. He became completely immersed in this feeling and realized that just a little more and he could completely relax. However, Diana didn't know what was going on in his head, so she let go of the guy's head and walked away. She went to the table to take the mirror and show him his own face. The girl explained that if he wanted to learn how to dress, he should know what he looked like. She added that he has a great appearance, so he will look attractive in any clothes. Although the guy didn't understand it now, when he entered Soviet society, his face would be appreciated. Diana didn't know what kind of people his parents were, but they were certainly very beautiful. Only now did the girl realize that the 8th Squad had been training since childhood. This meant that parents themselves could send their children to the battlefield. If you washed the squad and changed their clothes, then they would not all look like ordinary people. Meanwhile, in another house, a priest died at the hands of a member of the 8th Detachment. Even Lord Laurent was amazed at the way this mad dog behaved. He had already killed many priests, and the Lord did not understand what to do with this guy next. After Diana gave Kels a makeover, he looked incredible. He was so radiant with his beauty that it was painful for the girls to look at him. Kels didn't understand what the reaction was, or whether it was a curse or admiration. This guy had to be told it straight out for him to understand that it was a compliment. Diana enjoyed taking care of little things, like adjusting a collar or pinning an accessory. The girl thought that in Soviet society, such things demonstrated nobility. Although, in reality, Kels's face clearly overshadowed all such trifles. As the boy walked, Diana imagined that his appearance would turn high society upside down. Even if he were called the Lost Prince, everyone would believe it. It was said that the members of the 8th Squad had been training since childhood, so Kels could be as cute as Prince Sebastian. The girl had absolutely no idea how he got into the 8th Squad with such a gorgeous face. Kels knew nothing about it, so Diana assumed he was too young to remember. However, the guy admitted that he has no memories before he joined the army. He didn't even know how old he was when he joined the 8th Detachment. The boy didn't know his own name because from the very beginning he was simply called Kelsum. However, there were some people from the 8th Detachment whom he remembered. Diana heard that a spell was used during training, so she asked the young man to bend over to check something. Memory erasure spells were too complex to be cast on death row inmates. So the girl decided that something had happened and everyone had to have their memories erased, even though it wasn't her concern. However, if her memories returned, learning etiquette would be much easier, so she decided to give it a try. The girl used divine power and felt something similar to rough, intricate, unknown spells. They were very old, and if she touched them carelessly, she could make Kels disabled. The girl didn't want to harm the young man, so she gave up her attempts for now. Diana decided to find out more information, practice and try again later. Kels was already used to using divine power, so he wasn't that worried. Next on the schedule, they were supposed to have etiquette lessons, in which Diana promised to be ruthless. She hoped to joke and scare the guy, but it seemed like he had no emotions at all. She was disappointed because she thought Kels was a dumb jock and wouldn't enjoy studying. If Diana couldn't see his smile, then for some reason she wanted to make the guy cry. There were a lot of things that could cause trouble if they didn't know. They are usually useless, but there are always those who can find fault. Her own debut into Soviet society was truly horrific. When her older brother debuted, the whole family pooled money and bought him a stunning suit, so she was expecting a beautiful dress. However, they said they had no money and borrowed old-fashioned dresses from a distant relative. Everyone laughed at the fact that a young lady dressed like a 60-year-old aunt was making her debut in high society. This terrible, shabby little thing immediately added 10 years to the girl's age. Diana was worried then, but now she was calm because everything was long in the past. The girl came to her senses and decided not to burden Kels with such memories. She only promised that she would not allow a similar situation to happen to him again. A person who has already experienced something like this knows better how to avoid a repeat. Diana suddenly realized that Kels had stopped and wasn't following her, so she looked back. The guy looked at her very carefully and admitted that he understood her words. However, Diana only grinned because now she didn't understand what was going on in his head. She only noted that when Kels comes out, he will bring many people to tears. However, the girl did not yet know that the next major shock would happen to her in just a few minutes. Diana couldn't understand how a person who saw letters for the first time could write so beautifully. She herself didn't have much experience, but such a signature was definitely not a coincidence. The girl realized that from the very beginning, their study of letters was unusual. She didn't think we should expect results too quickly, so she only asked us to try writing the letters. She explained to Kels how to hold a pen and how to pronounce letters correctly. However, the girl's jaw dropped when she saw that he could write entire words with ease. Then she asked him to write down the whole phrase, consisting of capital and small letters. Diana thought Kels was a genius because he only looked at a word once and repeated it exactly. So they spent the next few hours endlessly writing and speaking words. At some point, the girl decided that she should come up with a signature for the guy that she would use when she entered high society. She couldn't believe he had managed it so easily, since her own signature was in type. She was even ashamed to remember how the servants laughed when they accepted her signature. Suddenly, the girl remembered that people who sign autographs for aristocrats also earn a lot of money. She decided it would be a good idea to develop this skill to live comfortably in retirement. Moreover, after Kels's debut, Diana was going to become a holiness, which meant she needed a proper signature herself. However, if she asks the guy for help, it would be an abuse of power. She wanted to ask the hero for a favor, but before she could promise, he needed to know what it was about. The girl hoped that Kels would not refuse her, so she enthusiastically asked him to help her come up with a signature. However, after some time, the girl looked at the sheet of paper with clumsy inscriptions with disappointment. Kelsey admitted that he tried everything he could, but nothing worked. Diana was sure that he was slacking off because he didn't want to do anything for her. To prove his sincerity, Kels took up training. However, instead of beautiful and elegant signatures, all he produced were shaky scribbles. The guy realized that he had failed the task, and now all that was left for him to do was die. Diana realized her mistake because the hero took this task too seriously and tried to stir him up. After several busy days, Diana enjoyed a quiet day. Early in the morning, when she just woke up, Kels was waiting for her, clean and dressed. At every meal, they ate dishes prepared by Chef Kels, who volunteered to do so. In his free time, the hero of the 8th detachment kept the house sparkling clean. That's why recently the girl lived in the mansion without even a speck of dust. At first, she sincerely thought that her new job was an express ride to hell. The road was terrible, but the closer she got to her destination, the more it reminded her of paradise. Now all she had to do was teach Kels the basics of etiquette or read to him, slowly enjoying herself. The boy had made great progress and could now read books on his own. She thought it would be better to take a break from etiquette lessons until the books she had asked the Lord for arrived. The girl even decided to practice baking again, which she failed at last time. She was surprised that there was anything this genius wasn't good at. Kels already knows a lot, so Diana decided to ask him himself what he would like to learn. Having received permission to enter the room, Diana saw that the hero was sitting by the window and enjoying reading a book. He sat relaxed, illuminated by the sun's rays, and calmly drank tea. Diana was incredibly pleased with the work done and could already see how everyone would praise her. Suddenly, Kels jumped up from his seat, knocking over his tea, and went to the window. Something outside made the guy angry, so Diana hugged him and tried to calm him down. The sensitivity was hard to fix, but if you held him like that for a while, Kels would quickly calm down. However, Diana realized that something really serious had happened from the guy's face. The next moment, the girl heard someone pounding hard on the front door of their house. This was strange, because the girl had been promised that there would be no unexpected visits. Nothing was visible, so Diana suggested going down and checking first. Last time she taught him that if someone knocked, he should check the voice to see who it was and decide whether to let them in. So Kels calmed down a bit and agreed to go down to do everything according to the rules. It was said that during the war there were many attempts on the lives of the fighters of the 8th detachment. Even though things had been quiet lately, Diana didn't know how she would react if something happened. She didn't want Kels, who had just turned into a human, to act like an animal again. So she ordered him to stand still, promising to sort out all the troubles. Although she felt strange, the girl said that she had an idea. She reminded Kels that she was, after all, a priest with real combat experience. In any case, she could simply burn the enemy alive while no one was looking. They had guards, but if the struggle could not be heard, it would be a bad sign. Lord Laurent apologized for not warning about the visit in advance, as the situation was urgent. She opened the door wide for him to enter and was horrified by what she saw. She had become relaxed lately and had completely forgotten that trials always come unexpectedly. He immediately became irritated and openly stated that he did not like this situation. The Lord was clearly not used to having to take this guy's doubts into account. However, Kels was confident in his feelings and was not going to let anyone pass. Diana didn't know who the Lord had brought or why the boy was acting so hostile. However, she could not ignore the pitiful looks of the soldiers. The girl hugged Kels carefully, trying to calm him down with all her might. She shook her head, silently ordering that the wounded man be carried in and removed from sight. Judging by Kels's reaction and Mr. Lauren's rumpled appearance, it was another member of the 8th Squad. The girl hoped that no one would have any strange requests for her. However, soon, while stroking Kels's head, which lay on her lap, Diana heard the strangest request of her life. The Lord literally begged her for a favor, but the girl was determined to refuse him. Lauren hoped that Diana would change her mind if she thought about it a little more. However, no matter how hard the girl tried, she was completely unable to accept this request. So she again refused to take on another member of the 8th Squad. Besides, this guy wasn't as kind as Kels. He had already killed half of the priests. On top of that, Kels himself didn't like this strange guy, which was the most important thing. She explained that she only gets cheeky when something unpleasant happens. The Lord was ashamed to say this, but he could not entrust this matter to anyone else. He stated that if Diana refused, they would just have to kill the guy. If you let him go, he will become a walking bomb, because if you lock him up, the information will leak out sooner or later. Diana couldn't accept killing a man, even though she tried not to think about it. Kels calmed down, so her life became a little easier, but the world did not allow her to rest in peace. The Lord asked to look after the boy only until he found another priest. There was no need to prepare him for his debut, just to make sure he didn't get into trouble. At this time, Diana was mentally fighting between her personal demon and Angel. Angel told Mr. Lauren not to force her to work for free and not to deceive her. The Lord literally read her mind and promised to give her twice as much money for overhead expenses. After these words, Diana's face changed and her eyes sparkled. The Lord added that the additional cash benefit that would naturally have to be paid would be quadrupled. After this, Diana completely beamed and declared that God had commanded not to turn away from people in difficult situations. Having received the girl's consent, the Lord fell to his knees and began to thank her for her mercy, although it was obvious that she was now in the most difficult situation. After all the strangers left, Kels and Diana decided to visit the wounded boy. Even though the Lord reported that he had been put to sleep, Kels could clearly hear that his former partner had woken up. The hero immediately rushed at the guy to protect Diana from him. Both of them were excellent fighters and survived the war, so they fought on equal terms. The stranger was surprisingly talkative and was deliberately provoking Kels. Diana was amazed that they didn't stop talking even while exchanging blows so fiercely. The girl didn't know if she should stop them, because this could very well be the standard way of communicating in the 8th Squad. She also got a whistle for her new lodger, Harvey. The Lord warned that the girl must definitely use it in case of danger. Diana once again looked closely at the fight that was happening under her nose. She realized that at this particular moment, she was not in any danger at all. Kels grabbed and beat Harvey until the boy went completely limp and quiet. After this, picking up his former partner like a sack of potatoes, the hero proudly declared that he had defeated his opponent. In the squad, they tolerated each other because of the order, and besides, Harvey was quieter then than he is today. Kels couldn't promise that there wouldn't be any more fistfights like that. He condemned the guy's ardor, but the members of the 8th Squad don't give up so easily. Grievances accumulate, especially in Harvey. He's a master of surprise attacks, a skilled killer, and stubborn by nature, so that will be hard to ignore. Kels promised to deal with this manipulative guy himself. He assured Diana that if something like this happened again, he would kill him for her safety. The girl was afraid that he would not get through without casualties, so she took on this case. Although after meeting Kels, this guy already resembled a walking corpse. The girl didn't want any unnecessary violence, so she asked the hero to do everything as gently as possible. Kels promised her this and pledged to find the softest rope. He assured that as soon as everything started, he would tie him up as gently as possible. Hours after the chase and beating, Harvey couldn't believe he was eating food cooked by Kels. It was a real culinary masterpiece, which he had never tried in his life. Diana was surprised that Harvey could taste food, as he had never thought about it before. Kels confirmed his words, although he only had that reaction when something really bothered him. The boy didn't enjoy the food, even knowing its ingredients, so Diana decided he had no sense of taste. Harvey confirmed that he too could hear the girl's heartbeat and the sound of birds in the sky. However, the guy admitted that he never thought about whether it bothered him or not. He was hurt by the girl's words and her attitude towards him like a dog. Diana simply explained that things were different with Kels, so she wanted to know the details. Harvey suddenly declared that Diana was very cool, and she did not deny it. Even now, she could definitely see that the guy had some social skills. It made her feel awkward calling him a crazy piece of trash or anything else. She noticed that Harvey and Kels were very different from the others. They had been trained together, subjected to various procedures and spells. The boy explained that he was different from the other dogs because he joined the squad when he was older than the others. So he knows a little more about the world than other dogs and has undergone fewer procedures. Diana was surprised because even the army officer Lauren did not know how the procedures and spells were carried out. Procedures and spells are unofficial orders that were not recorded on paper anywhere. Only the performers and the people who went through all this knew about it. Diana had to listen to the Lord's complaints for 3 hours, and it was all in vain. She hoped that through Harvey she would find out what kind of procedures and spells they were subjecting Kels to. She tried to question the guy, but he himself couldn't really answer anything. He only explained that all the procedures were necessary to make their sensations more acute. At first, Harvey tried not to use it, but it was simply unbearable to be on the battlefield. Moreover, they were told to do everything to survive and return home. Usually, the bosses killed those who couldn't bear it all and went crazy, and those whom they felt sorry to kill, they took and erased their memories. Even then, Diana did not understand that common sense on the battlefield was in no way similar to common sense in peacetime. The conversation with Harvey was very informative because he remembered and told quite a lot. Kelsa was irritated by the situation, but it turned out that he was gradually getting used to living together. The girl only had to wait until a new person in charge was appointed. However, she didn't know then that at some point, 2 strong rabid dogs would hug her with all their might. Harvey was so afraid of Kels that he cried and asked the girl for protection. To understand how it all unfolded, Diana recalled everything that had happened over the past few days. Harvey was surprised that Kels could cook, and such wonderful food at that. Diana noticed that Kels was a good student, or he knew how to cook before his memory was erased. Harvey believed that the guy lived in some mansion before joining the 8th squad. He was terribly handsome from childhood, so everyone thought he was the son of an aristocrat. Diana was struck by the fact that Harvey remembered the time Kels first joined the squad. The guy admitted that this kid stood out from his very first day even there. He had already appeared with his memories erased, and Harvey decided that the newcomer had been transferred from another squad. He knew he had no memories just by looking at him. It looked strange. Just looking at him, it was immediately clear that they had made an idiot out of him. At that time, he forgot how to speak, sleep, eat, and live, and was like a wild animal. Even among animals, there were those who went mad and had their memories erased again. But with him, it was different. Diana realized that if she constantly erased her memory, problems could very well arise. If you do this several times, you can become disabled, so some people lost their minds on the battlefield and died. Those who were supposed to go mad and die on the battlefield simply died a little later. Diana thought it was unpleasant to see this, because these were comrades with whom they had been together for a long time. Harvey believed that these were not comrades, but enemies who tore out each other's throats on orders. Diana didn't know what to say. People who had experienced it firsthand spoke about it indifferently. When Kels came in, knowing nothing, like a baby, everyone thought he was about to lose his head. However, this guy survived until the very end, and now they met again. Diana immediately sensed the tension in the air and grabbed Kels's arm to hold him back. She sensed hostility and ordered the two to stop provoking each other immediately. If they hadn't fought in the squad, it was unclear why they were now ready to attack each other. Harvey admitted that whenever he sees Kels, he wants to fight him. Diana realized that the guy had suddenly become aggressive, as if something had snapped into action like a fit. If there were no problems in the squad, then it was strange that this only happened to him with Kels. Harvey became more and more angry with each passing second and kept talking about seeing something in Kels's eyes. It seemed to him that this guy's eyes, nose and mouth despised him, so he couldn't stand it any longer. Kels immediately sensed danger and immediately ordered the girl to step back. Diana realized that if she and Harvey started fighting here, they would climb out the window and be completely out of her control. Harvey was already wound up and was about to attack Kels, who was protecting Diana. The hero was ready to rush into battle, but the girl grabbed him and begged him to stop. Diana closed her eyes in fear and realized that she had reacted too late when she heard the sound of the impact. However, when she opened her eyes, she saw that Kels didn't even defend himself and just continued to stand silently. Harvey and Diana were so shocked that the hero allowed himself to be hit and did not get angry that they stopped. For the first time, Harvey found himself punching his opponent without him reacting. Diana was proud that her puppy was keeping himself under control, but it could be temporary. She was going to do what she had to do, so she slowly walked towards the mad dog, still furious and at the same time unsure whether he should attack. However, Diana was not one to be timid, so she quickly walked up to the guy and grabbed his hand. She was determined to use all her powers of persuasion. From the situation, she understood that if Kels was a beast, then Harvey was a real man. While the girl worked in the temple, she knew that many different people came there. Of these, approximately 20% are real clients. These were people who had, in a general sense, gone mad, and it was useless to talk to them. Diana knew the only way to deal with people like that was to overwhelm them with her enthusiasm. She tried to convince Harvey that for someone who had overcome many trials and tribulations, this should be easy. She tried to convince him to feel the inner beauty, calm and willpower that could suppress his fighting spirit. Among other things, the girl used divine power and directed it into Harvey's body. If it didn't work, she wouldn't have taken his hand, but it was a tried and tested method. Harvey himself didn't understand what had happened, but he didn't even remember why he was angry. The guy didn't know how long it had been since he felt this good. He spun Diana around and confessed that it was the first time he felt such peace since the war. His horizons expanded, and even the feeling that he was being constantly watched disappeared. The girl's self-esteem was inflated by the fact that someone was right in front of her eyes. Suddenly, the man grabbed the girl and tore her out of the hands of Harvey, who was visiting. Because of this action, the guys started to conflict again. Diana tried to calm them down. She touched each of them and used divine energy to calm them. The girl again acted as enthusiastic as possible and offered the boys something to eat. The guys themselves didn't expect that it would work so easily for them. Diana knew that the main thing was to act confidently, and then everything would work out for her. However, the girl did not understand why, instead of joy, only discontent was reflected on the boys' faces. After this, Diana spent a long time trying to understand what exactly she had said wrong. Over the next few days, Harvey was calm but snappy at every opportunity. He couldn't control himself and raged at every opportunity. Literally everything irritated him, even just a look or a sigh. Diana was tired of what was happening because at first she thought that although Harvey was nervous, he was still human. She is now convinced that dogs have a more nervous intelligence and are more likely to get into accidents. At one point, Harvey even made his way to a rock he was passing, as if it was in for a fight. Diana didn't care that the guy was fighting with rocks, but his emotions were easily overpowered by Kelso. At first, she thought Harvey was deliberately trying to provoke the hero, but that was not the case. She was convinced of this when Harvey decided to run over a cloud that seemed to him to be an irreverent shape. Although Diana didn't understand it right away, she later became convinced that this guy was just crazy. He was always in conflict, and Kels protected the girl and stayed close to her. He knew his uncle wouldn't like it if he got into a fight, so he held on with all his might. Instead of coming to terms with Harvey, the boy began to act childishly. Diana decided that this could be seen as desensitization training. The girl hoped that he would not have problems in the future when he became independent. She believed that he liked to be touched because he had been through a lot since childhood. Diana asked to be released so she could go and calm Harvey down. Suddenly, Kels moved the girl behind him and cautiously approached the window. A second later, the glass shattered, and the hero grabbed Diana and pinned her to the floor, covering her with his body. Someone shot them with an iron arrow, after which Harvey jumped out the window and ran after the attacker. Diana tried to stop the guy, but Kels wouldn't let her. Even though it was dangerous, if Harvey went outside and caused a disturbance, they would be in trouble. The girl said that he needed to catch up with the guy, after which Kels threw her over his shoulder. He understood their mission, after which he calmly jumped out the window. Diana didn't care whether she went after the guy herself or with Kels's help, as long as it was quick. She decided to pretend to be a sack and stay calm so as not to go crazy. Soon Kels heard Harvey's voice and stopped, ready to defend himself. Diana didn't think she'd have the same luck as Kels this time, because the sounds were eerie. However, the girl didn't care anymore, even though she didn't like it. But the whistle really was a salvation. She reached for the weapon, but realized it wasn't hanging around her neck. There was no occasion to use the whistle, so she threw it on the dressing table and forgot about it. Kels was about to move closer and see what was going on. The girl understood that returning to the house for the whistle was not an option, so she followed the guy. She personally hoped that Kels would hold out and not give in to temptation. As they went a little further into the forest, they saw Harvey attacking the last of the attackers. Diana watched what was happening, but she couldn't even imagine such a thing. One punch from Harvey would have been enough to win, but he fought with bare hands against weapons. At some point, the girl even thought about just dropping everything and running away. She promised herself that if she couldn't do anything, she would actually run away. After that, she used her fighting powers to finish the fight. The girl easily made the attacker's face flush, and that was enough to distract him from Harvey. Diana was worried because it had been quite a long time since she had used her powers in this way. She used this method on the battlefield only when there was nothing else left. The girl realized that the arrow in the house was undoubtedly aimed at her. She convinced herself that this was just self-defense, and therefore God would forgive her. Diana saw that Harvey was shaking, so she wanted to take him back to the house. At the same time, she grabbed Kels, who was ready to rush into the fight. It would be very convenient if she could calm Harvey down in the same way. Finally, Diana saw the guy's face and realized that he was simply terrified. At first, she thought he was shaking because he couldn't control his rage. Only now did the girl realize that Harvey had gone through the war in his right mind and had fought in a more conscious state. If you know about something scary in advance, it will scare you even more. A person who has escaped death will take better care of himself because he remembers that fear. When a person is scared, even simple things can seem scary. She realized that Harvey was angry because he was afraid, so she hugged him and tried to calm down. She repeated that there was no one left who could attack and harm the guy. She promised that he didn't have to fight anymore because he was safe with her. The girl dealt with the enemies, and now no one could harm Harvey anymore. Diana was glad that the guy began to calm down and spoke like a human being again. However, she didn't expect him to have such a reaction after the battle. Harvey was sobbing, snot and tears streaming down his face, screaming about how scared he was. The girl didn't know that this would happen, so she couldn't foresee what would happen next. Diana hugged Harvey and tried to persuade him to go home and get some sleep. She asked him not to look at the terrible picture behind her anymore so as not to separate. Everything was going well until Kels suddenly grabbed the girl and pulled her towards him. He pressed her so tightly to his body that Diana could hardly breathe. Kels didn't like that Diana and Harvey were standing too close to each other. The girl hoped that this would be the end of it, but Crybaby's gaze was the opposite. Diana always thought that when a beautiful woman is embraced by two muscular men, it describes a sexy and romantic sight. However, in reality, everything was completely different, and she could hardly breathe, trapped between them. If in the evening the Lord arrived, who finally found a man who would take care of Harvey, he praised the girl for trying hard not to let him out. Diana admitted that the guy became calmer, and there was no longer any need to tie him up like that. The Lord stated that they could get there safely only because the girl had put him to sleep. After this, he demanded the return of the whistle that could stop Harvey. Before this, having returned to the mansion, Diana talked a little with the guy. Harvey thought everything would be fine because he was sane after arriving at this house. He even apologized to the girl for causing her so many problems. Before, he would just fly off the handle and run away, but now he felt like he could control himself if he concentrated. Even now, he had a very clear head and the feeling that he was smarter than ever. The guy even thought that he would be able to restrain himself even if the mad dog provoked him. Harvey wanted to take a bath and sleep, since he had been able to sleep for more than 3 hours since arriving here. Kels noticed that Harvey specialized in surprise and stealth, so he didn't sleep for more than a certain amount of time. His partner's voice irritated him, so he tried to keep all conversations to a minimum. Diana watched their squabble again, which this time was calmer. She knew that the hero's attachment to the priest was a common thing, but this was already going beyond all bounds. Surprisingly, this time Harvey himself did not want to continue the argument and simply ended it. The guy couldn't help but notice the fact that Kels had made significant progress since their last meeting. Although Diana couldn't say for sure, she was sure that Harvey felt better after what happened. Although she couldn't do it every time, she offered to help him sleep and relax. She believed that if the guy got a good night's sleep, he would become much less irritable. Harvey didn't mind a good night's sleep at all, so he happily agreed. After this, Diana filled the guy with divine power and put him to sleep. If she hadn't done this, he would have been able to even greet the Lord. An arrow that flew straight at her and a Lord who arrived without warning. She was confused by the real knights who arrived with the Lord to the house. The girl wanted to simply close her eyes to all this, remaining in ignorance, so she silently entered the house. Late in the evening, the Lord reported to his master that he had returned Harvey on his orders. The gentleman was disappointed because he had hoped that the mad dog would get into a fight and destroy the overly talented priestess. He believed that the girl was far from stupid, so he would be on guard, and there was no point in sending knights yet. The gentleman decided to persuade the girl, choosing the moment, and if it didn't work out, repeat the attack. Diana was lucky. She had a chance to get closer to him, since they had not met in person. The master ordered the Lord to stand up, because due to this position, he could not see the face of his subordinate. He hoped that they would meet quite often in the future. For the Lord, such words from His Highness were a great honor. The gentleman only demanded that the next time Lauren sent a man, he would make sure that no trace of the imperial family remained. Soon the Lord returned to the house and introduced the girl to their new cook. He also brought in a new manager who was supposed to take care of all the affairs. He believed that it was due to Diana's excellent achievements that their staff had increased so much. Although the girl was grateful, she noted that the Lord should keep his distance. The man immediately moved towards the door and hoped that Kels would control himself. He noted that once the manager was assessed, another workforce would come in. He added that Diana was definitely a novice sent by God, since they couldn't invite so many people. The girl hoped that this is exactly what the Lord would write in her characteristics. Diana felt that after the last incident, there was a distance between her and the Lord. This is exactly the distance that should be between a boss and an employee, so she saw no point in reducing it. On the other hand, the girl didn't know if she should say that Kels had become more nervous. He is so obsessed that lately she hasn't even been able to make any extra money selling blessings to the guards. Until recently, the girl could only talk to the Lord while in Kels's arms. The girl understood that she couldn't leave it like that, so she strictly taught the guy. She explained to him that he couldn't hang on her neck all the time. The girl was so engrossed in her studies that she completely forgot about the manager. Diana reminded herself to treat Kells like a young master in front of other people. However, the manager admitted that she understood the young gentleman's personal passion perfectly well. She knew that there were plenty of gentlemen willing to live on a leash, so there was no need to justify herself. She promised that her new master's personal life would be kept in the strictest confidence. Diana tried to convince the girl that she was wrong, but it was useless. The first thing the manager wanted to do was to evaluate the young gentleman's various aspects in order to select other employees. She needed to assess parameters such as nutrition, skin condition, and body size. To do this, she needed to come closer to him and touch him personally. Diana hoped Kels wouldn't mind. If anything, they could do it later. She explained that the gentleman was very sensitive and did not particularly like being touched by other people. The manager realized that massage, skincare, facial care, and hair care are all difficult if you can't touch. The woman decided that everything would be fine if she touched at the same time as Diana. If the gentleman does not like it when strangers touch him, then the presence of a familiar person will ease the situation. She was upset that her responsibilities did not decrease, even though there were more workers. However, the manager noted that she could not force the client to adapt. She needed to find the most comfortable way. She was upset that the client did not understand all the details and could not refuse the manager. The woman was amazed by his determination to see the matter through. She promised to demonstrate her professional enthusiasm, after which she opened her work suitcase. To begin with, she suggested conducting a hair health diagnosis and determining its color, as well as conducting a test for skin type and elasticity. To Kells, it all sounded like a description of preparation for torture, which he was not happy about. After some time, Diana and the hero were completely exhausted and convinced that torture does not necessarily mean blood. Over the course of the entire day, the manager examined everything, from every pore to every hair. By the end of the day, Diana couldn't even understand what was going on. Diana had no idea that there was a special person who takes care of hair, a person who is responsible for styling it. It seemed as if the young gentlemen were initially more concerned about themselves than the noble ladies. The boys were so exhausted that they completely forgot about their new chef. The woman startled them when she appeared unexpectedly and offered them a chocolate snack before the main dinner. Unlike Diana, Kels knew the woman had been around for some time. The girl apologized to the cook and promised that she would immediately take her to her new room. However, she saw the young gentleman's condition, so she offered him some chocolate to cheer him up. Diana had never tried such sweets before, so she looked inspired. She knew that it was difficult to try a dessert from a professional chef, even if you paid a lot of money. The girl offered the chocolate to Kels, who admitted that he had never smelled anything like it before. Only now did Diana realize that it was unlikely that a sweet smell could be found on the battlefield. To calm the guy down, Diana promised him that she would try the sweet first. She took a small, careful bite, and Kels watched her carefully. The taste was so magical that Diana beamed with pleasure. It was the first time she had eaten something so delicious, so she wanted Kels to try it as soon as possible. The guy didn't understand what kind of strange food Diana had in her hands, so he was in no hurry to try it. The cook intervened and noted that there were a lot of sweets, so there was no need to share them. The woman set the table and placed various desserts, promising to serve dinner soon. Diana understood perfectly well that the money for the contents of one plate would be enough for her family to live for a month. Kel still thought the chocolate tasted like dried blood or dirt. This amused the girl a little, so she urged him to try it sooner. Kels wanted to take the dessert, but he held it for so long that all the chocolate melted. As a guy trying dessert for the first time, he didn't know he had to use cutlery. Diana demonstrated to him how to break off a piece and spear it with a fork. She then carefully dipped it a little in chocolate and handed it to Kels. The guy still didn't want to try because he avoided everything that was unfamiliar to him. Diana enjoyed his sweet expression, especially compared to how it had been at the beginning. However, she was fed up with his slowness, so she simply shoved the food into his mouth. She was looking forward to Kels chewing and being able to tell her how he felt. The boy felt his teeth clench and an itch run through his arms and legs. He experienced similar sensations when he looked at the hand extended to him. In that hand was something strange and unfamiliar, which gave him a warm light, unnecessary things, and strange food. Diana decided that the young man liked the dessert, so she decided to feed him everything she had. Kels didn't know how to feel about things he wasn't used to and hadn't been taught. The girl ran around him and gave him a lot of different food, enjoying his reaction. Diana would give food, Kels would take it, and then the girl would smile, which meant he was doing everything right. When smiling, the edges of the eyelids and the corners of the mouth twitched slightly, and breathing became intermittent. Diana was amazed that Kels had just smiled a little because he had eaten some candy. She explained that this feeling is called joy, and that is why all people love it. Although the boy was confused by these new feelings, he realized that he enjoyed experiencing them. He even decided to lick everything that had melted and remained in his hands earlier. Soon the cook fully adapted to the new mansion where she was placed. The boys also got used to it and enjoyed every meal that was served to them. Today they had vegetable salad and potato soup with croutons, and for dessert they had chocolate cake and strawberry pudding. Diana realized that just looking at the cook was making her hungry. The girl noticed that there were more portions on the table today than usual. She was so engrossed in her food that she didn't notice that another person had joined them. The Lord felt some disappointment that Diana considered food more important than him. The heroine was still unhappy that Kels didn't warn her about these sudden appearances. Since the boys had gotten used to living with a cook, the Lord hoped that they would be able to expand the staff a little more. He was even impressed that Kels had turned him down verbally rather than just getting angry. And then he was completely delighted when the guy told him to leave instead of throwing him out of the house. Although Diana was nervous, the cook was a perfect fit for the place. The woman cooked diligently and showed no interest in the boys. She didn't even visit the room outside of working hours. This was rare, and especially true for the servants in charge of appearances, whom Kels would have to deal with in preparation for the reception. The places where masters of Soviet conversation and creative types gather can be strange for Kels. She didn't know whether she should leave the guy alone, but something else worried her most. The Lord noticed the girl's excitement and promised that everything would go well. Diana hoped that this time he had selected only the best, as in the case of the chef. Although Lauren was unable to find the ideal people, the staff had already been approved. She would have to invite people anyway, so there was simply no point in worrying. The next day, the most disturbing person arrived at the hero's house. Diana was horrified by everything that was happening and immediately grabbed the scissors that the stylist brought. She reminded him not to use any blades because the gentleman had bad memories of such objects. The girl changed her mind and took out special scissors that were absolutely harmless. She showed them to Kels to see if he was comfortable with the idea. The guy thought that cute scissors were not at all associated with blood, so he didn't mind. The girl was glad that the client liked her tools and she could start working. Diana was glad that Kels had calmed down a bit and the haircut went well. She wondered what would change if a stylist prepared such a perfect Kels. When the girl finished, Diana was completely struck by the guy's beauty. He looked even better than she expected because now the hero was dazzlingly handsome. She thought she was used to Kels's beauty, but this took it to a new level. The stylist was delighted with her work and believed that she had created art that even God would admire. She admitted that she became a hairdresser precisely for this day, and it has finally arrived. She literally begged to invite her for the next haircut and threatened to get rid of the competitors. Diana tried to calm the girl down because Kels could lose his temper at the mention of a threat. She hoped that her client liked everything and didn't want to change anything about himself. The young man walked up to the mirror and looked at himself, trying to figure out if he liked his reflection. He didn't want to change anything else, and the stylist decided that the client was happy with her work. She was worried because he had more of a chic and elegant image, not the one she had been told about. Diana remembered that the Lord had recently asked her what the final image of the young master should be. The guy had a nice appearance thanks to hair and beard care procedures, and his hair was dyed. Diana was very surprised when she heard about all this, because she did not know that Kels had undergone procedures. The guy explained that he was ordered to trim his beard for cleanliness, but he doesn't remember about his hair. These words almost made the stylist guess that Kels had once been in the army. Diana tried to change the subject because no one was supposed to know that the hero had once been in the 8th squad. The Lord warned that if anyone found out and tried to escape or blab, they could die. The stylist noticed that the client's hair was completely black, and usually when light hit it, the colour changed slightly. However, no matter how much the sun shone, her client's hair remained pitch black. She even added that among young aristocrats, her client's peers, this had even become fashionable. Diana realised that the head was a very delicate place for the spell because it completely destroyed the mind. The girl read the books and did not find a single suitable spell in her sources. Divine powers are also dangerous, so she was extremely careful when treating the client's head. Now Diana assumed that the spell itself was cast not on the head, but on the guy's hair. The stylist added that the colouring procedure can damage the scalp and even lead to baldness. But the guy had amazingly healthy hair, and all because Diana constantly used divine power. The stylist noted that her hair was growing quickly, so she would need to have her hair touched up about once a week. Suddenly she became embarrassed and asked for the next week off. There would soon be a festival to celebrate the second prince's birthday, and the girl wanted to attend it. Diana thought that it wouldn't be a big deal to miss one procedure, so she calmly let the girl go. She was surprised that the first festival after the war was in honour of the prince's birthday, and not in honour of the anniversary of the founding of the country. The stylist was excited, as they said the imperial family would be giving out free food and holding a parade. She looked so excited that even Diana became interested. As a child, she never went to festivals because it was too much trouble for her parents to take her there. When she came to the temple, she couldn't even dream about it, because during the festival they were the busiest. Diana said goodbye to the stylist, promising to invite her to dinner. The girl decided that in order to wait patiently for something, you need to know what it is. She decided to talk to the Lord, since it was expected that the other assistants would also decide to take the day off. Diana realised that Kels would be forced to meet new people all week. She thought that she should send everyone away for the weekend to give him a break from this stress. She praised the guy for holding up so well these past few days. The next day, they were supposed to have a skincare assistant come to see them, which was exciting. The scissor haircut, which Diana was most worried about, went well, so the hardest part was over. The next day, Chanel arrived, having been entrusted with taking care of the young gentleman's skin from that day on. The girl heard that her client was sensitive to sounds, so she promised to be careful and try to work without unnecessary noise. She knew that from now on she would be sharing work with Diana, so she hoped that the girl would have less trouble. Diana was glad that this man was as perfect as the cook. The girls hoped that they would be able to work together quickly and that everything would go well. However, something went wrong because Kels was sitting on the floor, hugging Diana's knees. The girl was afraid that something might happen, so she just left him like that, but Chanel wasn't very surprised. In fact, the heroine first made the guy sit like an aristocrat. This position wasn't very good for the waist, but it made him look more like a young master. However, this only lasted until Kels heard the sound of footsteps outside. He instantly returned to this position because he was already on edge because of all these strangers. Diana decided to keep it simple and say that he was a young man who behaved like a child. She hoped it would work and no one would have any unnecessary questions. In the morning, she explained to Kels that a skin specialist would come and touch his body several times a day. They agreed that if he didn't like it, the guy would tell him right away. Kels had been doing a very good job of taking care of his hair recently, so Diana had faith that he could do it. The first thing Chanel decided to do was to look at the condition of the young gentleman's skin. She was surprised that his skin was so clear, and she didn't even know what else to do. She was informed that the gentleman's skin had not received much care, so she would like to touch it and check it. Kels felt uncomfortable around other people, so the girl suggested thinking of her as a touch of the wind. Diana noted that this description suited her very well because the girl was light and practically inaudible. Typically, such skills were reserved for assassins, but Diana dismissed the possibility. She didn't want to believe it, and Kels would definitely smell blood. Diana patted the guy on the arm and asked him to stand up so Chanel could examine his skin. Throughout the examination, the specialist asked permission to touch each individual part of the body. Diana was eager to see if Kels could tolerate being touched by strangers. The tension between the specialist and the hero grew with each passing second. Diana literally burst into tears of happiness when the guy was able to calmly touch another person without going crazy. The hero assured that he was fine and did not feel any discomfort. Although Diana knew that the guy worked hard for such progress, Chanel was also a professional. The girl was attentive even to obvious things and always clarified everything. Kels turned around and wanted to know what Diana thought about all this. The girl realized that until now she had been the one making most of the decisions in his life. She did this because she was tired of explaining everything in detail and waiting. But this can't go on because Kels should become the young master, not her. So instead of telling the guy what to do, she told him to do it his way. The hero had absolutely no idea what to do, so he was a little confused. Chanel assured him that she could come later when the young gentleman was ready for the procedure. Although it wasn't necessary, Diana suggested trying it right now if the guy didn't mind. She promised to be there if he was just worried because everything was unusual. They agreed that if Kels didn't want to, he could just go through the procedures next time. The hero was determined and agreed to conduct an examination right on the spot. Chanel hoped that Diana would be by her master's side and help him. After this, the girl left to prepare for the procedure, leaving the heroes alone. Kels nodded politely, allowing the girl to leave, just as Diana had taught him. Even though the novice taught the boy, she had a strange feeling about the world of aristocrats. She wondered how Kels felt about people being so focused on him, pleasing and caring. He didn't understand anything yet, but she promised that he would figure it all out once he gained more experience. Diana reminded him that the most important thing is his feelings, so if he doesn't like something, he can say so directly. When the girl said this, she did not yet know that she would soon hear these words again and again and again. When Chanel returned, she picked up the gentleman and went with him to the bathroom. The girl invited Diana along, thinking that a priest was not necessary for this at all. While the gentleman was under her care, Chanel promised to make sure that no harm came to him. The girl didn't yet know that she was more worried than Diana about the guy not harming her. They agreed that Diana would definitely be invited, even if it was something small. The young master might bite if he didn't like something, so Diana didn't growl for him. The girl waited restlessly behind the door, pacing from side to side in excitement. Soon a loud sound and a disgruntled voice of a man were heard, which is why Diana was about to break out into the bathroom. However, the girl realized that there was no sound of Chanel falling or screaming. Kels was simply expressing his emotions in a calm tone. Diana convinced herself to calm down, because this was also part of the process of allowing the guy to cope on his own. The girl thought about this. Standing next to the door, she heard Chanel trying to persuade Kels to undress. The girl didn't know that the guy didn't like it when someone undressed him, so she let him do it himself. From the sounds that followed, Diana realized that Kels was doing as he was told and silently taking off his clothes. It seemed to her that just recently she had risked her life to prevent him from tearing a man to pieces. The girl was so immersed in memories of the past that she only remembered when she heard the guy's displeased voice. No matter what Chanel tried to do, the young man didn't like anything. It was still too early to relax because she could tell from his voice that the hero was very nervous. The girl decided that if she heard his dissatisfaction again, she would go in and check. However, she didn't have time to do this. She opened the door herself and asked for help. To avoid appearing too suspicious, Diana pretended to simply wait nearby. Chanel admitted that the young gentleman disliked other people's hands even more than she expected. So she hoped that Diana could lend her hands to do the work. Since the care of the young gentleman was entrusted to her, Chanel wanted to make him dazzle everyone. However, the guy didn't like her hands, so she wanted to ask Diana for a favor. She tried to boil it down to the fact that the priestess's hands were meant for healing, so it might be even more effective. Diana was unhappy because she had recently taught the boy to wash himself, and now she no longer had to do this work. She didn't want to go back to that time again, so she hinted that it had taken her a long time in the beginning too. However, Chanel shut her mouth so that her client, God forbid, would not hear these words. The girl explained in a frightened voice that the young gentleman was a nobleman, and it was unacceptable to ask him to adapt to the specialists. She was from the service industry, where they work individually, and the client's comfort is as important as life. Therefore, Chanel believed that it was imperative to find another way without having to adapt. If Diana doesn't want to, she can refuse. They will skip the washing stage and find another assistant. Only now did the girl realize that in the service industry, there are other rules that differ from established etiquette. Diana agreed that the young man had been through a lot today, so it would be better to return to this conversation tomorrow. She promised to calm the young gentleman down, so she let Chanel go so she could rest. When Diana entered the bathroom, she saw Kels sitting in the water. He was very irritated, but when the girl appeared, he immediately forgot about everything. The guy was about to get out of the bath, so Diana ran up to him and asked him to tidy himself up first. Kels was so excited, and Diana didn't have time to dodge, so the guy grabbed her and hugged her tightly. Diana gave him a few minutes, then gently asked him to let her go so they could finish. Kels was squeezing her so hard that the girl's lunch was ready to burst out. Diana realized that the guy was protesting because he was forced to do something he didn't like. The girl assumed that he simply didn't like the specialist, so she suggested calling another one. The thing was, though, Kels couldn't stand it when other people touched him. If I was going to become an aristocrat myself, I had to get used to being a fine young gentleman. Kels's feelings were important, but he couldn't avoid anything he didn't like. And still, Diana simply could not scold such a good puppy who was scared. The next day, she prepared her own weapons and was ready to defend her work environment. Diana and Kels had an important conversation last night. During this conversation, they discovered that Kels didn't like being touched by other people. However, Diana was curious how he would react if someone touched him at the same time as her. He tolerated all the sounds he didn't like when she calmed him down. So the girl decided that if she touched Kelso together with Chanel, everything would be fine. Although she wasn't sure about it, she decided to try this trick. She hoped that her idea would be successful because holding a person's hand is much easier than bathing a person. Diana mentally turned to the Lord and hoped that everything would go well. She never worked overtime and hoped that in the future she would work only as much as she was supposed to. She caught his mood and promised that today they would help each other in everything. This time the girl prepared a small bath to make Kels comfortable. She explained that she would apply a soothing scented oil that he might like. For a very shy and cowardly young gentleman who only relaxes in front of the priest, she knew that praise was a cure for shyness, so she hoped to get along with the client. Only now did Diana realize exactly how she pictured Kels in her head. The guy acted this way because he was nervous when strangers touched him, and he didn't like Chanel. So they agreed that everything would be fine if Diana held his hand during the procedure. Chanel knew that the more sensitive a person is, the more useful the familiar tactile sensations are. Diana gripped Kels's hand tightly and nodded for the girl to get to work. At first, everything was fine, and Chanel was even able to touch Kels and rub the oil into his skin. However, after some time, the young man rose in the bath and his robe slipped off his shoulders. This robe was once lovingly crafted at a top-class sewing factory for elite salons. And only now the poor thing realized that he was born for this and fell at the right moment. Diana was incredibly confused and didn't understand how everything turned out this way. Kels was a good boy. There was almost no sound except for the drop of a bottle of scented oil at the very end. They were almost finished, and all that was left was to move to the bed and give a body massage. Chanel accidentally dropped the bottle, and Diana immediately rushed forward to pick it up. At that moment, Kels stood up and his robe fell off, leaving the guy naked. Chanel thought she was a professional and saw different men's bodies without any thoughts. However, turning around, she saw that she was impressed by this body and froze in silence. The girl immediately began to express her admiration and praised the young gentleman's musculature. The noise infuriated Kels, and Diana had to work hard to calm him down again. It didn't matter whether the girl was scared or surprised, Chanel's heart couldn't help but beat hard. Although the girls tried to act professionally and save face, they still had to give the young gentleman a massage. Kelsa was irritated by the noise. His head was buzzing from the high temperature and the strange aroma that was floating around. Diana noticed this and wanted to calm the guy down, but accidentally slipped on a bottle of oil. Kels reacted and caught the girl, protecting her from injury, accidentally dropping the bathtub as she fell. Kels could smell the wild, sweet, cloying aroma and the hot water that made his body heavy. The close beating of someone else's heart and the warmth emanating from Diana's body made his head explode. The girl noticed that the guy had turned completely red, but she thought it was because of the unbearable noise. She immediately hugged him and used divine power to calm Kels. The guy listened to the beating of her heart and calmed down with it, feeling safe. Chanel watched them from the side and was the only one who noticed the strangeness of the atmosphere. She apologized to Diana for not putting the bottle of oil away immediately and allowing the fall to occur. After a few days, Kels became completely accustomed to the girl and even allowed her to give him a massage. Regardless of whether Kelsey was taking off his robe or wrapping himself in it, Chanel was unperturbed. She too was not yet accustomed to this body, but as expected, the girl was a professional. However, something in their interaction had changed, and it was noticeable to the naked eye. After everything that happened, Chanel suddenly became too withdrawn during work. For the first time, Diana felt like they had taken a little kindness and made a whole person out of her. But then Chanel lost everything, and Kels, on the contrary, felt more comfortable. Diana hoped that, like a well-trained dog, he would easily please the specialist. She wanted to find out what happened and asked that her dog not be hated. It was difficult to say whether dogs felt more comfortable when they were loved or when they were treated coldly. The girl didn't know whether she should ask this directly or leave everything as is. She knew that silence would cause misunderstandings to grow, and that could not be allowed to happen. Diana wanted to leave, but suddenly Chanel called out to her as if she wanted to say something. Even though Kels didn't want to leave the girl, she sent him to the room first. Diana literally took the guy to the bedroom and promised that she would join him soon. After this, she returned to Chanel, who was glad that Diana understood her. She offered to let the girl hear her story while she gave her a massage. Chanel provided a lot of gradient so they had leftovers, and no one would notice if they spent a little more. The girl did not squander her employer's money, but only wanted to take care of the body of the novice who worked so hard. Diana knew that priests should be immaculate and not be concerned with appearance. Since they were told that they should bring the light of love to people, the girl decided to love herself. Chanel admitted that this opportunity is not available to everyone, but she makes an exception because Diana is the best. Since she does her job well, good relationships are important to her because these words caught her attention. Chanel admitted that she had served various gentlemen and ladies, but now it was especially difficult for her. The problem was that the gentleman did not talk about what irritated him. I got the impression that the young gentleman doesn't know how to communicate with people at all, and it's difficult to talk to him. Last night, Chanel was thirsty, so she went into the kitchen and Kels appeared completely silently. He took the water from her in a menacing manner, and it seemed as if he was sorry to waste the food. Diana realized that the noise from Chanel drinking water was so loud that the guy couldn't stand it. During the walk, the hairdresser leaned against a tree, and the young gentleman looked at her as if he was ready to kill. Chanel continued to tell stories about the experiences of the cook, security guard, and other workers at the house. Diana was only glad that her child had gone through all this without bloodshed. She knew that his nickname, the insufferable rude man, was an incredible advance. Diana was attached to this rude gentleman and got along well with him, so Chanel just wanted to complain a little. The girl had no idea that her complaints were actually praise for Diana. At the end of the procedure, Chanel noticed that the girl was a real beauty and that she shouldn't have hidden it behind her uniform. The service was truly top-notch, and Chanel didn't even forget about lip care. Diana herself was amazed by her reflection in the mirror because she hadn't seen herself in such good condition for a long time. Kel sat in his room the whole time, hugging his knees, and heard every word spoken. Diana explained to Kels that the main difference between a person and an animal is his speech. Therefore, he should speak like a human, but now it sounds more like barking. The girl knew it was time for them to broach the subject, as talk of the guy's bad reputation was spreading throughout the mansion. Kels ended up becoming a young gentleman who is described as difficult, passive-aggressive, and looking down on people. Diana knew what Kels looked like from the perspective of someone who wasn't in the know, so she couldn't leave it at that. This is a delicate issue that will be resolved over time, but now it would be possible to focus on learning communication skills. Since the boy wrote letters much better than she did, they now had to learn speech, although the girl herself did not know much about the upbringing of nobles. As a novice, she was only taught how to address aristocrats, which is a completely different kind of etiquette. She thought it wasn't her job, but when things turned out this way, she realized she needed to teach him at least basic social skills. That's why the kids decided to start with reading and develop their speech in this way. Kels leaned too close to the girl and she felt his breath on her neck. The children began to read sentence after sentence out loud with the correct intonation. At some point, Kels became distracted and focused his attention on watching Diana from the side. He realized that her closeness was making him feel hot, and it was a rather strange feeling. Besides, he did not understand at all how what was written in the book could happen. Diana tried to explain the allegory to him in a way that even Kels could understand. However, the girl quickly realized that the guy learned best through practice. The gardener was now in the house, so they decided to go out into the yard where there was no one. While Diana was busy teaching the boy, this place turned into a real work of art. The boys were walking through the garden and decided to learn the names of the plants at the same time so as not to waste time. Diana never let go of the hero's hand, leading him around the garden and showing him the plants. He admitted that the flowers are very beautiful, but they cannot last long. That which does not move and is not solid dies easily, and if it does not survive, it cannot grow and reproduce. The boy raised his head and stared so hard that the sun blinded him, as if the wind had hit his eyes. He stared for so long that his eyes began to water due to increased sensitivity. Diana apologized to the guy because she didn't think that sunlight could cause him such pain. The girl only wanted to calm the hero down, but instead the tears only grew stronger. The boys and the girl couldn't take their eyes off each other, and Kel slowly lowered his head, approaching Diana. The girl suddenly wanted to take his hand and said that they needed to go back to the house and make a compress for his eyes. She pulled Kels into the house, and he only followed her and looked at her shining form in the rays of the sun. After starting classes, the boy's vocabulary began to develop rapidly, but in a strange direction. Initially, Kels had almost the same face no matter what emotion he was expressing. The results from reading the books became apparent within a few days, but the guy didn't control what he said. He once declared that the smell of cookies was as sweet as the smell behind Diana's ear. The girl was very embarrassed and did not understand why she was even sniffing in such a place. Diana didn't know how to react to this because Kels loved this smell, but it all sounded very strange. She thought that the guy was just learning to speak, so he was thinking and talking about people close to him. However, for several days the guy talked about everything, comparing the aromas of food with the aroma of her body. This time he declared that the cheesecake was as sweet as the scent of her own body. Diana scolded the guy, tried to persuade him, but he continued to say strange things out loud. Because of this, she couldn't properly enjoy her cheesecake because she kept thinking that it smelled like her. It was very disappointing because this dessert cost more than her weekly food budget. She was also infuriated by the fact that Kels had ruined her appetite and was enjoying his food on his own. So she handed him the pie and asked him to express his opinion about it without her name. The cook, who had previously been too busy to turn her ideas into reality, unleashed her full creative potential in this house. The girl hadn't tried the pie herself yet, so she didn't know what it tasted like, but she hoped it would help Kels. She cut him a piece and then watched carefully as the young man tried it. However, no matter how long she waited, he could not gather his thoughts to express his opinion. Suddenly, Kels perked up and declared that the pie tasted like sour shit. Diana tried to shake off the thought that Kels knew what it tasted like because he'd tried it before. She explained that a guy shouldn't be so rude about food if he didn't like it. The girl added that one cannot talk about the taste of shit unless one has tried it. Kel said that to find out what day and what food a target of interest ate, he had to go through a lot of trouble. Diana didn't understand why the 8th Squad treated its members so cruelly. The girl decided that since Kels had tried it, he might be telling the truth, so she wanted to know too. The pie smelled sweet, as usual, and tasted simply amazing. She tried to convince the guy that he was just really sweet, but he couldn't understand it. He admitted that he still found it disgusting and asked that his taste be respected. Although this situation was strange, Diana was proud that her puppy had learned the concept of respect and taste. However, she still refused to accept what he said. The girl decided that Kels was subjective and had some kind of deviation in perception, so she decided that it was imperative to check other people's opinions. They fed the same pie to a hairdresser and a cosmetologist and got the opposite result. While one of them was delighted, the other thought that someone had just tried to poison her. Kels noticed the barber's reaction and suggested that the pie tasted like sour shit. The girl was glad that at least someone understood her pain, because that was exactly the feeling she had. The cosmetologist noted that if a pie tastes bad, you still can't call it that way because the chef will be upset. The hairdresser was glad that the young gentleman supported her, otherwise she would have thought she had gone crazy. Diana watched everything from the sidelines and realized that the guy's statements could stun someone. But now was not the time to look for problems in his words, because etiquette would always have to be adhered to. By this time, the cook appeared and explained that the product had been imported from the far end of the continent. People who like it taste cheese, mushrooms and honey, while others feel the taste of sour shit. From the cook's strange laugh, one could tell that the woman was pleased with her result. Surprisingly, Kels's incredible directness led him to find allies in this house. That's why Diana decided that a guy's speech doesn't always have to be elegant. Honesty is also noble. The girl decided to check the rest of Kel's statements, which she considered strange. She asked the beautician if she could taste cheesecake behind her ears, but was met with only misunderstanding. The boys consulted with the Lord and decided that the entire mansion would take a 5-day vacation. Kels was constantly studying and meeting new people, so he needed a break to keep himself under control. Diana was also tired of constantly trying to be the best novice, always on edge, so she should have been happy about this vacation. However, the girl received the letter and did not want to know at all what awaited her inside. Soon the girl had to explain to Kels why she needed to leave for a while. She didn't want to leave. She felt comfortable with him, but some things people need to do even if they don't want to. Until now, he had to do everything, but now he learned what he liked and what he didn't. Yet, there are times when you have to do things you don't like for the sake of the future. He understood this perfectly well, but he was still not happy with this situation. During her vacation, a summons arrived from the temple, where the girl was asked to appear for a short while. She really didn't want to go and didn't even know why they were calling her if everything was so good. However, no matter how much she wanted to, the fact that she had to go couldn't be changed. The girl was very worried about leaving like that and leaving her puppy unattended. She asked that the guy not leave the house, and even if a hired killer came, security should deal with him. It took a lot of effort on her part to calm Kels down. At first, she didn't even want to hear about the fact that he would have to stay without her for some time. Although it wasn't easy for the guy, she herself was also worried about leaving him. The guards refused to take leave because the assassins were constantly visiting, so they had to protect the young master. The girl didn't even know that hired killers came more often than she thought, but they were quickly dealt with. When this happened, she would comfort Kels until it was over. Diana was worried that the boy might get hurt or get into some kind of trouble. She knew that one day she would have to leave because she would continue to serve in the temple, and Kels would become a noble lord. The thing was that they lived two parallel lives that never intersected. The girl was overcome with melancholy when she thought about letting the guy go. She knew she better prepare in advance, because one day she would definitely have to leave him. The boss greeted the girl and heard about how she fulfilled God's will with all her soul and body. Everyone in the temple followed this will, but there were those who tried harder than others. She perfectly suspected that with such words the boss was again trying to involve her in something strange. He noted that it was not customary to talk about such things while standing, then offered the girl the honor. The man tried to please Diana as much as possible and even offered her a cup of tea, which he had never done before. He thanked the girl for responding so kindly to his sudden call and returning. He had no doubt that the girl would succeed and would be able to easily cope with her task. He believed in her strength and was happy that she went in the name of God, even in such a harsh place. Diana was already tired of this performance and wanted him to get to the point faster. Usually, after such praise, you had to somehow brush it off and admit you were a good boy. Diana had no desire to do this. She just wanted to get home as soon as possible. The boss thought he was imagining things, so he decided to continue this thread. Diana knew how to interrupt this stream of consciousness, so she reminded him about the donations. However, from the man's look, she guessed that the donations came from the third prince. He promised support, so it was expected, but still the guy was very generous. The temple was delighted with his help, so they asked Diana to continue the work until God's will was fully fulfilled. The boss told the girl directly that she needed to spend a lot more time and work slowly until everything was perfect. Diana realized that it was the third prince who started this program, and she needed to continue to extract money. She didn't mind, even if it was for a long time, because it was even better this way. No one knew what Kels was like now. In other words, he was telling her to hang around for a long time with a mad dog who was rumored to be no better than a killing machine. The girl had to very closely close her eyes to this and pretend that she knew nothing. However, she wanted compensation for her work, so she tried to get herself an additional salary at every opportunity. The boss, although he was a lover of money, understood that it was worth feeding the hand that would bring even more wealth. Among other things, the girl asked permission to visit the spell building. It was a repository of books that contained a spell that could work miracles even without divine power. Spells can be used regardless of whether a person has power or not, so priests learn them during their fieldwork. Only teaching ministers are allowed to enter this building, otherwise everyone could perform miracles and not go to the temple. The spell building was the temple's bread and butter, and the boss was afraid that the girl would sell the spells and cause trouble. Diana knew how he was thinking, so she explained that she had come across a spell cast on the warrior and wanted to clarify it. She remarked that she could bring the warrior to the temple, after which the chief immediately gave permission. The girl felt a little disappointed because no one knew that now her puppy no longer bites. She decided to hold off on bragging because it would be much cooler to do it when Kels finally became a real young master. After that, the girl went to the spell building and then was going to pick up her additional salary. She didn't care whether her boss took it as a threat or not, she just needed to tidy up her puppy's hair. The entrance to the spell building was carefully guarded and closed with both normal and magical locks. The attendants demanded that Diana follow the rules she spoke about, otherwise she would be kicked out immediately. Diana knew that if this spell affected memory, she would have to go to the main temple. Since she's investigating for Kels, she might as well cast other spells that will bring in money. She was going to read everything, remember it, and use it, because she is very smart. The girl stumbled upon a scar removal spell and a hair coloring technique that could make her money. A few hours later, her wallet was full of money and her head was filled with spells. Diana knew that if she hadn't been chosen to work with Kels, she would have been up all night preparing for the festival too. She really enjoyed the freedom she gained from putting her life on the line. The weather was perfect for the festival, and Diana hoped Kels was doing well too. She sincerely believed that on such a wonderful day, every person should feel great. Therefore, she believed that she had every right to spend at least one day without work and worries. The girl was riding in a carriage through her hometown and seemed to be immersed in memories of when she was a child. With these thoughts, the girl looked out the window and asked the coachman to turn around and go towards the 3rd Street. 3rd Street is one of the busiest streets in the country and is packed to the brim during the festival. People are constantly offering something and inviting people into their shops. Everyone is happy. And if you drive past the 3rd Street and go to the outskirts, you can find yourself in a completely different world. When the girl wore the same uniform as the other priests and ate the same food, she forgot about the past. At that moment, she forgot that her home, the barony of Brandon, was not just poor, but penniless. The girl entered the house, and the mother immediately rushed to her daughter to greet her after a long separation. She was glad that the girl no longer had to return to the front, because health and safety came first. If her elder brother were capable and in good health, he would go to the battlefield or somewhere else to earn merit. She believed that her son could not do whatever he wanted, since they were aristocrats, but this did not concern her daughter. Diana remembered why their family ended up in this situation, even though they were a noble family. Great-grandfather discovered poison in a well, and for this merit received the title of Baron, but without the support of his family, skills, and the rest. If there are no achievements, the title is taken away by the 5th generation, but if someone receives merit on the battlefield, then this becomes the merit of his family. Diana knew that her mother's words about health and safety were filled with regret and were not pretense. She knew her mother very well and what she so desperately wanted. The girl noted that even though the war was over, there were still many ways to distinguish oneself. Although they were both aristocrats, they worked every day, while their father and brother behaved arrogantly. Therefore, the girl learned at an early age to hide her true feelings and masterfully say what people want to hear. This time she said that she had worked a lot, so she still had some money left. That is, when she gave her mother what she wanted, she smiled sincerely and thanked her. The girl knew perfectly well what to say, so that no one would ask unnecessary questions. They both performed a play that followed the same script every time. The mother reported that this time the brother had joined a poetry club and was upset that he was the only one working with a pen, not a glass pen. Glass pens are quite expensive, so the guy was afraid of being told that he was an aristocrat who didn't even have money for a pen. Diana was disappointed that her mother was going to spend the money she earned by risking her life on some nonsense. She was disgusted to hear that she wanted to save her brother's reputation at the cost of her daughter's life, because his pride was much more important. Mother did not consider the work of priest dangerous, and she was also sure that if God commands one to give one's life, then so be it. Diana didn't want to listen to this anymore, and was going to leave the house without even sharing a meal with the whole family. She admitted that she had only stopped by for a short while and should have already gone back, but had not had time to do so. The boy was unhappy that he was being treated like a beggar, because even in a family it was necessary to watch one's manners. Diana couldn't stand the fact that even her own brother demanded to be called young master. And what irritated her even more was that her mother supported him in everything and never took her daughter's side. Diana climbed into the carriage and promised that she would never again put her hope in this vile family. She hated this feeling, but she knew perfectly well that she would definitely come back. The girl asked to be dropped off near the beginning of the estate so she could walk home. She knew that if she went deep into this quiet forest path, she would be able to find her home. It was all over, so she just wanted to let out her emotions and cry from helplessness. Diana promised herself that she would just cry until she reached the front gate of the house, because she was sad. She was going to wash herself with warm water and throw everything away with a light heart as soon as she entered the house. She knew that she had to return to the mansion as a priest, and they had neither family nor title. They should marry only remembering the love of God and not their own mother. Therefore, in this world there was no sad young daughter of a baron who spent her whole life cleaning up after her older brother. The girl was bursting into tears and looking at the road, so she didn't notice how she crashed into something hard. She looked up and was stunned, not understanding how Kels had appeared right in front of her. She was afraid that something had happened, and that was why he had left the house. The girl calmed down, realizing that the guy came because of the way she cried. She apologized to him for sobbing too loudly, promising that it would not happen again. She couldn't afford something like that because she was already an adult and had to work. However, the guy admitted that he left not because it was noisy, but precisely because she was crying. Diana tried to figure out if something irritated him or if there was something specific about her tears that he didn't like. However, Kels denied everything, so the girl decided that he was simply scared of her tears. She believed that the guy came out to find out what happened and why she was behaving this way. The girl tried to turn everything into a joke, but Kels didn't let her do this, speaking as seriously as possible. He openly admitted that he was afraid for the girl and therefore came so that nothing would happen to her. At that moment, she realized perfectly well that she had tamed this puppy too much, and she became embarrassed. She remembered that at home her tears were despised and considered a sign of weakness. So she tried to convince the guy that he shouldn't have bothered to go all that way. She apologized to him and asked him to leave, promising that she would come when she calmed down. Instead, however, Kels simply walked silently up to the girl and pulled her tightly to his chest. He heard the loud beating of her heart and understood that Diana was excited. He stroked her head and told her that she was safe with him and that everything would be fine. Kels controlled his power and gently lulled the girl to sleep, as she usually did. The guy was incredibly warm, so Diana allowed herself to forget about everything at least this time and hug him tightly. After that, she stopped holding back her tears and cried as hard as she wanted. The girl cried for some time and did not know how long they stood like that. She finally calmed down and let the guy go. He saw that her eyes were red and swollen. Diana insisted that everything was fine and that they should return for dinner. The girl noticed that Kels had become more delicate and gentle lately, but she was in no mood to explain it. He didn't ask anything and waited until she finished crying, retreating when he was pushed away. Now the guy was learning to rely on her, but one day he would become a real young master and everyone would want to rely on him. Diana knew that everyone around him could be comforted, even like she was now. So the girl asked that in the future Kels not be a rude young master. She hoped that he would be delicate and gentle, the kind that would make her feel cozy and warm, like the sun's rays. The guy agreed, although he didn't fully understand what it all meant. Diana knew they still had a lot of work to do, but she believed Kels would become a good man. At that time, Diana had no idea that her work would end so early, because the next few days passed as peacefully as possible. The house was so quiet due to the absence of other people that even Diana could hear a fly hitting the window. She only saw one, and Kels explained that there were 3 flies flying around the whole house right now. One was here, the other was in the blue room and in the yellow one, which was at opposite ends of the house. The guy said that he hears them, and they are very loud, and these sounds irritate him. Diana was amazed that he tolerated the beating of her heart, which was very noisy, but such trifles irritated him. Kelsa wasn't at all irritated by the sound of her heartbeat, but as soon as the 2 flies met, he killed them with one blow. From all these events, it seemed to the girl that not just a couple of months had passed, but an entire eternity. She was prepared to live in subordination for many years, but everything could end faster than she expected. Diana was calmly drinking tea in the car, but almost choked when she heard a sharp, loud sound outside the window. The girl looked into the distance and realized that the city was launching fireworks in honor of the 2nd prince's birthday. But what struck her most was that Kels sat calmly and kept his composure. It reminded her of a bomb on the battlefield, so she asked to tell him directly if the guy needed help. However, for Kels, there were no problems as long as Diana was by his side. The girl knew that she was a good tranquilizer for the hero, but she didn't think that she was that good. She knew that people stopped taking medication on their own when they felt better, and the boy hadn't been short-tempered or anxious lately. She thought that even without her help, he would now be able to live like an ordinary person. She explained that he doesn't kill people because of the noise, answers questions calmly, and doesn't get angry about everything. However, Katerina surprised her by noting that this was only possible when he was next to her. Diana even breathed a sigh of relief a little, because she had begun to worry that she would be kicked out. She pushed those thoughts aside and reminded herself that if she finished the job, she could come back happily and get a promotion and a cash reward. The girl once again thought that everything would be fine if she stayed with Kels all the time. Outside, there were concerts and fairs because of the festival, and people were talking to every passerby. She believed that this was the ideal atmosphere for practicing social receptions. So Diana happily invited the young man to go for a walk to the festival. She knew that the guy had only seen them in books, but had never been there in person. Once Kels heard that the festival would be crowded and noisy, her interest waned. But Diana explained that the festival was similar to aristocratic receptions, so she suggested treating it as training. Kels was unpleasantly surprised that she would not accompany him to the receptions. It was strange for the priest to appear there, and besides, the girl wanted to leave at least one pleasant memory with the guy. The aristocrats had a lot of things to do and worries to worry about, and it was very difficult to live happily and freely. So Diana suggested that Kels create some pleasant memories that he could return to in times like these. Having received the hero's consent, the girl immediately decided to use the clothes that the tailor had sewn. Every outfit was amazing, and it was a matter of finding the perfect one for the event. One of them was too formal, the other one was too masculine and uncomfortable. Diana wanted to settle on the perfect, simple black suit that would perfectly suit the hero's aura. She felt that something might happen because of this, so the girl asked the hero to change into a regular white shirt. The boy was well looked after and perfect in every way, but he couldn't stand out too much at the village festival. Plus, she loved watching Kels change clothes and show off his amazing body. While the guy continued to dress, Diana was getting ready to dress up for the festival herself. She hadn't worn anything other than her novice clothes for a long time, so she was glad to have an excuse to dress up. The girl changed into an outfit that the dressmaker made for her from leftover fabric. She even made a little ribbon for her that completed the look perfectly. Kels knocked carefully on the door and entered, frozen in place by one look at Diana. The girl knew that Kels didn't have much of a concept of beauty, so she wondered if it mattered to him. She froze in place, waiting as the hero slowly approached her and touched her face. The guy explained that it was like watching a bud bloom, because in its full bloom it is simply beautiful. Diana was embarrassed by the fact that he said all this while looking intently at her. She believed that if she spent money and dressed up, it would be beautiful, but not that beautiful. She thought Kels was praising her, but he was being sincere, just as she had asked. They had had a conversation a long time ago, and they agreed that Kels would say what he felt somewhere, remembering what he read in books. The guy continued to insist that in his eyes she looked like a flower, which embarrassed the girl even more. She seemed to be looking at a dissolute man who would stir up high society. Diana apologized in advance to those who would faint from such words, spoken in such a voice, with such a look and facial expression. The girl could only be glad that she had raised this boy too well. If she wore a service uniform, then she was a servant of the temple, although deep down she had long ago cast aside any sense of duty or anything of the sort. She could not completely ignore the expectations of others, so she took care of her appearance. Satisfying the family's expectations as a money bag was much more unpleasant, but now she was not a novice or a baron's daughter. The girl suddenly realized that she should have gotten permission from the Lord if they were going to leave the house. However, she hoped that the Lord would go with her after everything she had done, since they were just going to have a look and come back. Diana knew that the boy was being kept locked up, not because he was a criminal, but because they were trying to protect him. Thanks to the hero's abilities, they knew that there were 30 guards around the house on all sides. Diana was delighted when Kels admitted that they could easily elude them. Although she felt a little awkward that the guy had to pick her up in his arms to do this, an hour later, they finally got out of the house safely, without even killing anyone along the way. Although they had spent extra time out of caution, they were now able to walk until nightfall. Between the mansion and the street where the festival took place, there were several villages, a lake, mountains, and dense forests. So Diana suggested getting to the lake, taking a carriage and riding it to the festival. Before this, the boy usually slept due to the spell when he was in the carriage. Diana realized that he had never had to deal with such a concept as motion sickness. She explained that it was a condition in which you felt like you were about to vomit. Just nearby, the girl saw a carriage and a coachman who was ready to take them to the festival. Diana didn't know then that the walk would be filled with unimaginable things from start to finish. The boys learned from the coachman that there would be a march in honor of the prince's birthday that night, and that fireworks would be set off. Diana had never attended the festival due to her work, so she was looking forward to the evening. However, as soon as he got into the carriage and set off, Kells immediately ran into problems. The guy could control his perception in this situation. There were no irritants so strong that it was unbearable. He clearly heard the clatter of hooves, the snorting of horses, the creaking of the carriage and wheels. He felt shortness of breath, a rapid pulse, and a sense of unknown danger. No matter how hard the hero tried to analyze the situation, he could not understand where the danger was coming from. Smoke, screams, destruction, fire, blood, and a stranger appeared before his eyes. Kells couldn't move. Diana saw something was wrong and immediately tried to calm the young man. The hero reminded himself that everything was happening in his head, and in reality only the warmth of Diana's hands was there. The girl thought that the problem was that they were in an unfamiliar carriage, and the guy was sick. She immediately asked the driver to stop and helped Kells out. The guy immediately hugged her and pressed himself tightly against her, which was a little different from the usual attack. The girl realized that Kells was incredibly scared and was constantly muttering something. Diana didn't want him to get lost in this fear and lose heart, so she hoped to find him and pull him back into reality. Kells thought back to his past, but he told himself not to give up because he still had work to do. Unfamiliar voices discussed where such a handsome young gentleman could be sold for the highest price. They injected him with a drug so that the boy would remain unconscious for a long time and not bother them. The stranger grabbed him by the hair and explained that the boy would sleep a little and then wake up in a different place. He promised that after awakening, the young master would begin a completely new life. The guy began to fall asleep and could not say his name, but he was a real young gentleman. When the hero woke up, he saw that Diana was calming him down and trying to bring him back to his senses with divine powers. After waking up, he could not say anything and only silently looked at the girl, unable to look away. She carefully took his face in her hands and tried to see if everything was okay with him. She explained that she had paid for the carriage and asked it to go further away, so he should not worry. Kells loved the scent that came from Diana's body, so he rubbed his head against her hand. He wanted the scent of her touch to stay with him as long as possible, so he asked to talk. Diana didn't want to indulge him, but the guy looked at her with such a sad look that she couldn't resist and gave in. She explained that young gentlemen usually did not ask to be stroked so unceremoniously. Diana tried to convey to him that this movement is not usually done just like that at any time. However, he rejected all of her arguments, which disappointed the girl. Judging by the way he was talking nonsense, the guy was perfectly fine. Diana knew that getting into the carriage was not the best idea, so they would have to walk. However, she had spent so much divine power that she was unable to move normally. She felt dizzy, but the girl needed to replenish her strength and eat something. Kells immediately crouched down and picked up the girl, wrapping her around his neck. She was furious because she had to protect her human dignity. Diana explained that this was only the way to carry luggage, so if he wanted to carry her, he should do it like a human being. At first, Kells picked the girl up with one arm, as if she were a small child, but that was too much. Then he grabbed her under the knees, but that was also too awkward. The next time, he simply grabbed her by the shoulders and lifted her straight in front of him, which wasn't the best option either. The guy was disappointed, but Diana still decided that she could sit on his back. Before, Diana risked her life when she was behind the guy, but now everything was fine. She liked that the guy had such a broad back, but she didn't know if she could be happy about it. She explained that only a truly special person can be carried on your back. Young gentlemen don't usually carry people on their backs, but today is a special day. The guys arrived at the festival faster than the girl thought, but strange things were said around them. There was an atmosphere of love everywhere, and everyone perceived them as a couple. Some man suggested that the guys try pancakes from his stall on their first date. Everyone around them turned their attention to them because Kells was still holding the girl on his back, which made her incredibly embarrassed. Diana enjoyed the dessert and thought it was nice to sweeten life sometimes. It was a special dessert that was eaten only on special days. Unlike what the hero ate in the mansion, there was nothing here but sugar. Diana admitted that she was too busy as a child, so she tried it for the first time. These regular desserts are too sweet and quickly become boring, so parents rarely buy them. They often scold each other because their children persuaded them to buy something and then don't want to finish it. This was not the information the young master needed, but it was still good to know for the sake of experience. Diana was surprised that the young man ate his dessert so quickly. It was the first time she had seen a person who had finished this sweet bomb to the very end. Diana didn't mind sharing her dessert with Kels since he liked it so much. However, she was a little embarrassed by the fact that the guy started eating right from her hand in such a public place. Luckily, everyone was busy having fun, so they weren't too worried about the couple. And again, as soon as the girl turned away for a second, he had already finished the dessert. She decided that since the guy had such a good appetite, he should have been even more excited. Since they had chosen this place today, Diana decided to go and challenge the food market. The girl was excited to try everything she could never afford before. Towards evening, the boys had eaten so much that they had to sit down and rest on a bench. Today, Diana even tried things she never dreamed of as a child, which is why she loved money. From Kelsey's surprised face, the girl realized that he knew nothing about the concept of money. She knew that the young master might not know about money, but on the other hand, it could be harmful. Diana poured several coins into the boy's hand and explained which ones were for what. Kels was delighted with the shiny coins that felt so good in his hands. Diana explained that by paying a certain amount, he could get what he wanted. He was delighted, thinking that he could buy Diana, but the girl disappointed him. She explained to him that usually no people are sold for any amount of money. However, he was serious and wanted to know what he needed to do to get Diana. The girl explained that her life is completely dedicated to God, so she cannot give it away as she pleases. Kels could ask God to give him Diana, but she didn't believe it would work. The guy became even more upset when the girl reminded him that he didn't have any money anyway. She was upset that the guy worked in the war, but he had nothing at all. She wanted to clarify this with the Lord. Diana announced that since they had come to the festival, they needed to teach Kels how to spend money. He couldn't buy her, but he could afford to buy everything else. Diana wanted to suggest to the guy to go into some store and look for something that he would like. The boys didn't even notice how they found themselves in a crowd that was enthusiastically waiting for the prince. Only now did Diana remember that she had been warned about the evening parade in honor of his birthday. The crowd was all about the enormous contribution the prince's army had made to winning the war. Although some remembered that the 8th detachment had paved the way, they only honored the army of the 2nd prince. His Highness personally rode and greeted people, congratulating them on the holiday. For some reason, Diana had a sense of déjà vu, as if she had unexpectedly solved a case or mistakenly looked behind the curtain. The girl didn't know what to think because she couldn't properly explain what was happening. Even if she could do it, she felt it was best to keep quiet. However, Diana noted to herself that the two princes were surprisingly similar to each other because they were brothers. No one had yet been granted the title of Crown Prince, so everyone was expanding their influence. Diana decided not to meddle in anyone's business. Princes must take responsibility for their own lives. The girl was curious about what kind of life Kels wanted to live, but he only repeated what he had been taught for several months. Then Diana explained that she was not asking about what he should do, but about what he himself wanted. For the guy, this turned out to be a rather difficult question, because he didn't care where or what to do. The main thing was to be with the girl. Over the years of social and public life, Diana has identified several rules for protecting her mental health. The girl completely stopped thinking and always pretended that she had not seen or heard anything. By doing just this, more than half of the suffering that society will have to face could be prevented. The less a person knows and the more vague his opinion, the better his life becomes. So she didn't know if it was okay for her to try to teach someone to think for themselves. She wanted Kels to have everything he wanted and the freedom to say no to the rest. The girl wanted the hero to be able to live the way he wanted. Diana reminded herself every day that this young man lived in a world different from hers. However, the only thing that got through to Kels was that Diana would leave him. She immediately tried to calm the young man, but it was too late. People around overheard their conversation, and now the girl had to justify herself to them. Diana didn't choose this guy on purpose, but she realized that there was a responsibility hanging in the sky. She explained that if the guy was going to become a young gentleman and live in luxury, he would have to break up with her. The girl noticed that no one told him that if he became what was needed, he would live with her. I realized too late that I blurted out something without thinking, because I should have said it more gently. She tried to explain that it wasn't that she didn't want to, but that they couldn't live together. She felt like he was about to cry, but due to his past membership in the 8th Division, he now had a rather unusual aura of murder surrounding him. Kels realized that Diana couldn't continue living with him even if she wanted to. The girl added that she was a novice and that she was with him now, but that she should generally live in the temple. Then Kels responsibly declared that he would definitely become a novice with her. Diana even imagined that the narrative would be ideal if he repented of his bloody campaigns. However, the girl quickly dismissed these thoughts because she could not indulge in illusions. She explained that novices are very busy, and even if the guy becomes one, he will not have time for meetings. She added that she herself could not quit her job because then she would have nothing to earn a living with. The girl decided that the time had come to reveal to the hero the most important truth of this life. She explained that not everything can be bought with money, but without it you can't buy anything at all. Now they had a lot of money to have fun and thus understand its meaning. So Diana said that they definitely needed to go for a walk and spend some coins. Sometime later, the girl found herself with an empty wallet, sitting on a bench with a pile of purchases. Next to her sat an incredibly satisfied guy who was practically beaming with happiness. Diana realized that they had bought a lot of things just for her because Kels looked the same in every store. He endlessly praised everything that Diana's hand touched, and the girl was unable to resist. In the end, they spent the most money at the cosmetics store. The saleswoman took them into circulation from the very first second and began to offer new products. She offered them a sample and asked the young man to dip his finger into the jar and apply the contents to the girl's lips. Diana was so exhausted that she completely missed the moment when Kels put lipstick on her lips. The young man looked at them without stopping and declared that he would like to continue touching them. Even the saleswoman blushed and covered her face with her hands from these frank words. Even after some time, Diana still could not fully recover from her embarrassment. However, the girl did not know what to do now because all the money had run out. She stated that they bought useless things and were not even able to take anything for the guy himself. However, Kels noticed that these things were not useless at all because he wanted to buy them. He admitted that he enjoyed watching what Diana did. He wanted to see her happy smile, and so he bought her something again and again. Diana forced herself not to raise her head because if she met those eyes now, she would not be able to turn back. The girl always came first for Kels, and she even thought that if it had been someone else instead of her, nothing would have worked out. However, she didn't know if Kels would remain the same when he met other people, or if he would change even more. If she gives in to influence now, the one who will suffer will be only she. The guy tied a scarf around her neck, stepped back and remarked that Diana was very beautiful, knocking her out with these words. Diana dreamed of people being able to follow their hearts, but she didn't want to be too harsh and categorical. So she just turned his words into a joke and decided not to pay attention to them. However, the girl realized that now she would not be able to let the hero go, pretending that nothing had happened. She knew that later she would be able to remember this with a smile, just as they had once had fun. Meanwhile, Kels continued dressing her in new clothes, even kneeling down and helping her buckle her shoes. Diana could no longer withstand such an amount of compliments and was ready to give in. The girl didn't look in the mirror, but she felt like an undressed madwoman when she put on all the new clothes. Kelsa was so filled with happiness that she was sorry to say anything to him. She decided to just enjoy the time because at the festival you could dress up however you wanted. The boys were walking along the streets and came across musicians who were playing for the public. The girl explained that while the musicians play music, those around them move their bodies as they feel and dance. Unexpectedly, she invited the young man to take her hand and join the others. They left their purchases nearby, within Kels's line of sight, and joined hands as they walked out into the center. Diana felt a strange sense of elation, but attributed it to her recent thoughts about strange things. The girl realized that it was stupid to offer to dance if she herself did not know how to do it. However, Kels would still have to do this at the balls because everyone there danced badly, so they did not stand out. The girl thought for a moment and didn't immediately notice that Kels wasn't actually that bad of a dancer. She didn't really understand it herself, but she had a feeling that he had danced before. She realized that the guy remembered how to dance, which meant that his memory was beginning to recover. The footwork and rhythm were different from the art of wielding weapons, and it was impossible to learn to dance just by watching others. Judging by the way Kels brought her in, even though she couldn't dance at all, he'd done this before. This meant that the boy had learned this in childhood and was a true aristocrat. However, it was strange that even after ruin, aristocrats were sold like slaves on the battlefield. The girl wondered if the young man would like to regain his childhood memories. Kels had never thought about it and wasn't sure he needed to know everything. Diana knew it would be difficult for her to explain to him the importance of memories. She wondered if Kels wanted to remember his family and parents when he thought about it. No matter how offended and angry she was, she could not completely stop communicating with her family. For some time, the girl was afraid that if she left them, she would be left completely alone. Even though her family was poor, she was still afraid of being thrown out. However, Kels immediately noticed that he was not at all afraid of being alone. Diana wanted to take this topic further and try to help Kels remember his family. However, at that moment, someone in the crowd nearby decided to propose to his girlfriend. The man stood in front of the girl on one knee, holding a box with a ring in his hands and asking her to marry him. However, instead of the expected delight and agreement, the girl was irritated by his behavior and even cursed. She politely declined and hinted not to do it, but he didn't understand her and decided to ask the question in a public place to put pressure on him. The girl admitted that she hated this feeling, after which she silently turned around and walked away. People in the crowd also began to discuss that the only thing left for the poor guy to do was go home and cry. Diana knew that the guy had brought it on himself, since a public proposal was being made to a person with whom there was already a marriage agreement. She explained to Kels that relationships don't always work out the way you want them to, so you need to listen to your partner to be together. Suddenly, the hero asked whether the guy and girl would have been together if she had accepted the proposal. Diana confirmed his suspicions and explained that you need to get married when you know for sure whether your other half is ready for it. However, the girl was taken aback when the next moment Kels turned and looked at her with a hopeful expression. Kels was trying to find out what he needed to do to marry Diana. However, the girl did not want to hear anything about it and repeated to him that it was impossible. She got so angry while telling him that novices cannot marry that she broke her heel. The girl explained that she could not do this because her life already belonged to God. She thought that the sudden breakage of her heel was even for the better, since she usually didn't dress up. Diana hoped that Kels had calmed down by now, but he was wondering if he could fight God and defeat him. The worst thing is that the girl actually thought that the guy had a chance to emerge victorious from this fight. Diana explained that God must be the most powerful in the world and Kels must die just to try to fight him. The guy noticed that the girl became a novice to earn a living, and he could help her with this. Kels hoped that if he could earn enough money, the girl would be able to leave the temple. Diana knew that the guy would soon have a lot of government money, and with it, he would become a young master. In fact, the rich and handsome puppy who cares only for her attracted the girl very much. She once had a friend who found herself in a similar situation and was thinking about leaving monasticism and getting married. However, such guys were either crazy or divorced or just wanted to drag her into bed. Even then, the girls knew that there was no ideal, rich and handsome man who would be to their liking. There was a catch everywhere. Diana was sure that Kels was acting like this right now only because he didn't know anything, so she had to be vigilant. She explained that it's so easy to quit a job you've done your whole life because money isn't everything. The girl decided that there must be some reason that was more important than money or faith. She explained that she had no reason to stop being a novice because she liked this life. It wasn't easy, but she was happy with her current position, which she had achieved on her own. Kels realized that for him, she would have to give up the life she was happy with, and she had no reason to do that. He wondered what could be the reason for such changes, but even Diana didn't know the answer. I thought for a moment and remembered that the man in the square was shouting about love. He wondered if his words could make someone want to marry him. Diana had no choice but to admit that a proposal is indeed usually made to a loved one. However, the young man's next question literally stunned the girl. No matter how long Diana thought, she could not understand what love really was. She thought that she would never encounter such a thing, so she never thought about love. Her pride did not allow her to admit that she simply did not know what it was. Diana had dealt with children many times and understood that explaining this was an easy task for her. She told them that love is the care that God shows towards people. It is a warm, tender, and affectionate feeling. The girl always thought that this was a good and understandable explanation for everyone. However, whether it was understood depended to a large extent on the person listening. The girl realized that the explanation was actually too abstract and imprecise for Kels to understand. The man in the square talked about his love for the girl, so the guy believed that love is an action. His endless questions tired the girl so much that she gave in and decided to spit on her pride. Diana admitted that she had never experienced this feeling, so she couldn't really describe it. He continued to pursue her and asked why the girl left the man if she could simply love him in return. The heroine explained that love is not something that can be simply done, it happens unconsciously. Love happens by itself, like a heart that beats faster when a person is excited, not because it is ordered. After these words, Kels realized that love is a very strange state. It can be recognized by certain symptoms, such as a racing heart when a person is excited. It manifested itself differently for everyone. For some, the sight of a loved one would cause their heart to beat faster or their face to turn red. From the people in the temple, Diana knew that the desire to be together, the feeling that you are the most beautiful person in the world, haunts you. Kels paused briefly, then confessed that he loved Diana as fireworks exploded behind him. The girl was surprised, then laughed cheerfully and declared that love is nothing. She added that in the future, when the boy becomes a young master, he will be ashamed of what he said. The boys moved on, and Kels kept thinking about the girl's strange look and laughter, the meaning of which he didn't know. He was so immersed in thinking about this that he woke up only when he smelled blood. Only thanks to his reflexes did the guy manage to react to the explosion and cover Diana with his body. Kels sensed the armed men approaching, but he couldn't tell how many there were. He suggested not to hesitate, but simply eliminate all the enemies, because they were quickly approaching. Diana wanted to run and avoid as much as possible a face-to-face confrontation with these people. Kels realized that retreat was their priority, and the boys began to run away. Diana was sure that this was not just a fire, but a real attack. There was nothing in the house that could have caused an explosion of such force, and that's where they should have been. Someone deliberately blew up the house along with the fireworks so that people wouldn't notice. Diana hoped the rest of the staff were okay, even though they were away for the festival. The girl knew that no one could be trusted, so they needed to find a place to hide. Kels heard that the enemy was approaching much faster than expected, so they would have to fight. The boys ran as fast as they could, but it still didn't help them. Diana decided to hide, at least in the thickets, and sit quietly so as not to attract attention. The attackers saw the abandoned things and realized that there were people in such a remote place. They couldn't afford to make even the slightest mistake, so the decision was made to search the surrounding area. The commander gave the order, and the rest of the team climbed out of the wagon to carry it out. They saw movement ahead and fired several arrows, damaging Diana's face. The girl moved too slowly, so Kels picked her up in his arms and ran forward, taking all the attacks from behind. Diana knew that because of her, he couldn't fight off the attacks and would only suffer more. However, the guy ignored her, and the girl was furious that when similar situations happened, he did not listen to her. The attackers got close enough to realize that they were now pursuing not witnesses, but a target. Since Kels was busy, Diana decided to protect them with her divine powers. The girl took advantage of them and burned the faces of her pursuers to buy herself some time. She asked to let her through and fight because she could take care of her own safety. She explained that if Kels got hurt, she could heal him, but if he died, there was nothing she could do. The hero realized that he could do anything. The main thing was not to die, and he was good at that. The young man jumped up with lightning speed and rushed towards the attackers. He easily stopped their weapons with his bare hands, not sparing his palms at all. The attackers knew that the hero served in the 8th detachment, so they did not let down their guard and attacked together. Diana just stood to the side and watched what was happening, admiring Kels's fighting ability. There were a lot of enemies, and the 8th squad was an assault squad, so Kels was not used to protecting someone. The girl thought it would be wonderful if she could release as many fireballs as she wanted. However, she couldn't. She needed to save her strength for treatment and try not to lose consciousness. The number of attackers increased, as did the number of wounds on Kels, who was already in serious trouble. Therefore, the girl decided to lure the opponents and help the young man. She hoped that everything would work out, so she rushed away, forcing the attackers to split up. The girl ran as fast as she could towards the residential buildings, weaving between the trees. She had been on the battlefield before, but the enemies were incredibly fast now. The girl realized that these were high-class assassins who were sent after the member of the 8th squad and his priest for a reason. However, her life was dear to her, and Diana was not going to just get rid of it. The girl almost managed to escape the pursuit, but due to an injury to her leg, she tripped and fell down the slope. She was so badly hurt and tired that she was ready to lose consciousness at any moment. She hoped that Kels would run away and live happily ever after, but she had no idea what would actually happen. The next time Diana opened her eyes, she found herself sitting on Kels's lap, her dress in tatters. The girl did not understand how both of them were left without outerwear. Diana was literally burning with embarrassment and didn't know where to hide. Kels said the weapon that had shot her was poisoned, so he took it out. The hero pressed his hand tightly against the wound on her waist to stop the bleeding. Only now, when the girl heard about this, all the pain she had received came back to her. Diana was worried about Kels because it was a real battlefield with explosions, pursuits, and fights. The guy admitted that he was completely fine, but he was very scared. Everything was fine while Diana was around, but then she disappeared and a terrible scream was heard. At first he felt only the noise of the battlefield, the smell of death, spilled blood and gunpowder. These things were more familiar to him than sweet-scented oil or a cozy bed. But then he heard a scream, and everything else lost its meaning. He became afraid. Diana apologized for leaving him alone, and Kels was pleased to hear that. The guy explained that he found an empty house and had not been in it for about 5 hours. The persecution stopped, so Diana decided to just move on, but first of all, she got herself in order. Even though she looked terrible, at least now she was completely covered. The girl didn't even know where to go, because it was equally dangerous everywhere. Both the temple and the third prince's side, and the Lord's shady superiors, each of them could be kind to them or kill them for profit. The temple treated them well only because it received support from its patron. The third prince's side was the most trustworthy, as they expressed their favor with large sums of money. However, Diana did not know how to get to the people who were in the imperial palace. They established a friendly relationship with the Lord, despite the fact that he was following orders from his superiors. The girl didn't know at what point he would be given the order to get rid of them, so it could have been suicide. Diana was so deep in thought that she only woke up when Kels called her. The young man sat down and invited the girl to climb on his back so that she wouldn't have to walk. Diana knew that the wounds on his back were not fatal, but even they were beyond her power to heal now. However, she used the rest of her strength to at least ease the pain from them. Diana hoped that after the war ended, Kels would be able to live like a human being. She suggested that the guy try to get to a safe place before sunset. However, before they had time to move away from the house, the hero felt that someone was approaching them. The boys heard the sound of horses' hooves and thought that reinforcements had arrived. Diana heard the voice of the Lord who was looking for her and tried to stop Kells. However, it was too late. The guy heard the enemy and immediately rushed forward to protect the girl. At first glance, it seemed to the Lord that the boys were faced with a serious problem, but everything was fine. Besides, he was incredibly glad that his head was also intact after this attack. Thanks to Diana's lessons, Kells recognized him and spared him, not finishing the job. Diana didn't know if they could trust the Lord, but one look at the big shot dispelled all her suspicions. The injury was mild enough that she had enough strength to heal it. When Lauren became himself again, he was glad that the priestess had survived. The young man explained that all members of the 8th Squad were attacked at the same time. All the mansions in which the members of the 8th Detachment lived were blown up. He wanted to report this to the guys, but was delayed because of the fireworks in honor of the festival. When he arrived at the house, it was already in ruins, so he didn't expect to find them both alive. According to him, Diana realized that he really did not intend to get rid of them. They needed to get to a safe place, but one horse couldn't handle 3 passengers at once. Reinforcements arrived just in time to pick up everyone who needed help. The guards from the mansion were worried about the novice and the hero, but they were impressed by her appearance. The girl was extremely embarrassed because she had completely forgotten what she looked like now. The Lord reproached the guard, noting that he should have pretended not to have seen anything. He demanded that the horses be immediately released and that his clothes be donated to the wounded. Lauren wanted Diana and Kells to cover up so they wouldn't feel so embarrassed. Only now did Diana understand what power meant when she unexpectedly saw topless shows from the guards twice. The girls helped her carefully climb onto the horse, and only then did she ask where they were going. The Lord climbed in behind and explained that they would be going to a safe place that the state could guarantee. In this case, Lauren, who had a high status and title, accompanied Diana because of the polite treatment. However, Kells didn't care. In his eyes, it looked like the girl was kidnapped. With one swift movement, he grabbed the boy and threw him away from Diana, sending him flying for a long time. The Lord was enraged by this behavior and tried to attack the hero, but the guard stopped him. Diana remembered that her puppy was very jealous, so he didn't like this situation. She apologized to the gentleman and said that she would go with Kells. After this, the hero immediately transformed and calmly sat down on the horse behind the girl. The Lord held back because in front of him was a member of the 8th Squad who had been attacked all night and even received injuries. After what happened, he was a ticking time bomb, so Lauren jumped on his horse and ordered him to follow him. The girl realized that she still hadn't heard an answer as to where they were going. She understood that the Lord could take them to a deserted place to get rid of witnesses there. The girls were on guard all the time, but it soon turned out that these worries were in vain. Having overcome the richest districts of the capital, the guys arrived at the Imperial Palace itself. There, Diana was able to calmly wash and change clothes and tried to forget about the shame in the forest. The Lord was glad that the clothes suited the girl because now they could talk calmly, face to face. Diana was angry because she would have felt much more comfortable if no one had specifically reminded her of this. She decided to let the gentleman get away with it just because he saved them. There was still some time left before dinner, so the Lord suggested moving to the study and talking over a cup of tea. He explained that from now on the girl could use this room as her own. Diana was grateful for the opportunity and asked when the rest of the clergy would arrive. However, after her question, the atmosphere suddenly changed, and the girl realized that it was better not to raise this topic again. The Lord explained that she should no longer be interested in the mansion's staff. He added that the girl no longer needs to worry about anything at all. Although they were not spies, they were not found innocent either. In the other mansions, the workers also disappeared, the houses were blown up, and no one, except for the members of the 8th Detachment and the novices, died. Diana felt sick when she remembered the empty mansion where only the 2 of them were supposed to remain. It might have seemed like an accident if it weren't for the attempted murder. If an outsider had been injured, the situation could have become much more complicated, so there was a high probability that some workers would have simply been removed. The betrayal was painful. Diana would have preferred them to be suspicious from the start. However, the girl realized that at some point she had simply lost her vigilance. The Lord apologized because they had thoroughly checked everyone during the hiring process, but they could not prevent bribery during the work process. In addition, the young man thanked the girl for keeping them alive. Diana had been through a lot, so she reminded him that gratitude is not something that can be expressed only in words. Lauren thought the girl was hinting at a reward, so he assured her that the reward had already been prepared. However, Diana no longer wanted to wait for some mythical money. She could die any day. Now the girl demanded that the reward be received right now. Even the Lord was frightened and declared that she would be given the best support and a decent reward. This option suited the girl who was risking her own life because of someone else's plans. Besides, Kels was the only one left alive from the 8th squad. Diana didn't know what these guys were for, but now they would be more focused on her and Kelsa. When they arrived at this house, the Lord informed them that it was a safe place. However, Diana understood perfectly well that no one could be trusted in the Imperial Palace. The Lord agreed with her, because in this house everyone had their own plans. Diana was scared, even though she was in the temple and on the battlefield, but she was only a simple novice. And now she was told that she had to deal with people from the Imperial Palace who had been through fire and water. There were many threats here that Kels would be weak against, and Diana wouldn't be able to protect him from everything. Just the thought of it took her breath away, and her heart started beating faster. However, the girl decided that she needed to put all her worries aside and try to do everything in her power. So she looked at the Lord and asked very seriously how exactly the defense costs were determined. The young gentleman immediately understood what the girl was getting at and offered to increase the limit. Diana pressured him until he agreed to increase the expenses 5-fold. This was the only option that suited her, because if she couldn't trust people, she had to buy security with money. She knew that in this cruel world, the only thing that could protect them was money. Diana felt sorry that the other priests and members of Squad 8 had died, but right now she needed to focus on saving her own lives. The Lord promised to take care of them to the best of his ability. Kels was fine, but as soon as they entered the castle, he suddenly lost his temper. He almost lost consciousness. Diana attributed it to exhaustion, because in her arms he made strange sounds that she could not understand. It was like a fit. The girl was afraid that she would have to start all over again. The Lord and the novice were sad that their progress was constantly being hindered by something. Lauren explained that as soon as Charlotte learned of what had happened, she ordered the boys to be escorted to the house immediately. This is the residence of the Third Prince's aristocrats, so the boys will be able to avoid meeting others if they stay in this room alone. He added that while the owner of the palace is usually responsible for paying for the accommodation, an exception has been made in these new cases. Typically, these were gifts that were presented to the owner of the house every day, expenses for food, etc. It was all worth it, because permission from the imperial family was required to enter. The Lord added that only noble families of high birth could enter the palace of His Majesty the Emperor. If you try, you can get into the palace of the second or third prince. This is the center of power. However, the palace of the first prince was closed by order of His Majesty. Diana thought that since it was empty, it would be better to live there, but it was forbidden to go there. Although the Lord was worried about the boys living in the palace, he did not want more trouble. There were still other topics that the guys needed to discuss, but they were unceremoniously interrupted. Kels literally ripped the door off its hinges when he burst into the tea party. Everyone was worried that something had happened, but Kels simply rushed towards Diana and knocked her off her feet with his arms. The boys fell onto the couch, and the girl gently stroked Kels's head, trying to calm down. She knew that the guy had just changed his clothes, but he was already sweating. He was so nervous. The girl was worried that her puppy was scared without her, but now she was there, and everything would be fine. The Lord still stood in place and was afraid to move because he perceived everything differently. In his eyes, a huge wolf pounced on a defenseless girl who was also speaking encouraging words to him. Lauren was frightened because he believed that the novice's head and body could be crushed in an instant. However, in reality, the guys were simply lying next to each other, hugging, trying to come to their senses after what had happened. Once Kels had calmed down a bit, Diana helped him up and sit properly next to her. That is why the girl hoped that they would have the opportunity to secretly enter the palace of the first prince and live there. The Lord would have liked that too, but he knew it was simply impossible. The palace was closed personally by the emperor, so the guy was unable to do anything. If anyone finds out that the boys are living there, they could be executed for violating the imperial order. Diana understood this, but she believed that the palace itself could be the most dangerous place for Kells. The Lord would have been glad to provide them with lodging elsewhere, but Lady Charlotte was ordered to accompany them both to this house. After his words, Diana realized that the entire organization of this project belonged to her. Lauren confirmed her words, explaining that this was also the will of His Highness the Third Prince. Diana began to suspect who was behind the dispatch of assassins to eliminate the 8th Squad. She knew that the situation would be significantly different depending on whether it was the second prince or the emperor. The Lord couldn't say it outright, so the girl asked which of them he would vote for, since he was doomed in any case. Lauren admitted that he was just an ordinary aristocrat and lived, gradually achieving success thanks to his mental abilities. He added that if the words from his mouth became known, his life would end very quickly. The guy admitted that he doesn't even manage this entire process, but only carries out orders. Diana understood that the Lord was responsible for them, but the general, who was the main person here, was the second prince's man. Lauren himself didn't expect the girl to be so insightful. She knew that he was on the third prince's side, but instead of being hostile to the second prince, he was thinking about changing his position as needed. She even guessed that he did not want to take risks and take someone's side, only to change his mind at any moment and survive. Diana understood his feelings, that people were just trying to get ahead like everyone else, and that's why they sold out. However, in order to survive herself, the girl needed to know what kind of person His Highness the Second Prince was. Although Lauren calmed down a little from the fact that they were in the same position, he was still afraid to say too much. He only admitted that the prince was a disgusting person who was difficult to work with. The Lord knew that if this reached the soul of His Highness the Prince, the end of the world would come. Lauren had already said too much, so he realized that the one who was complicating his fate was himself. He admitted that there were few hired killers in the palace, but there were a lot of ears, and one should not believe everything that was said. However, there was one person who had a different opinion, the second prince. At first, he amused himself by playing the game in a military camp, far from the battlefield. When all was finished, the army of the second prince set out, and he ordered them to bring victory. Diana heard that he even slapped the king of the enemy troops when he knelt down. The second prince did not have to take part in the battle, but he was able to gain all the glory for himself. He was a leader who had nothing but power, and he always took all the credit for himself. However, no one understood why His Majesty the Emperor had not yet named the next heir. Because of this, the second prince's impatience reached its limit, which also affected the influential figures who tried to stay close to the heir. Even the third prince continued to show outstanding abilities alongside Lady Charlotte. So the second prince got angry and started doing whatever he wanted. The Lord admitted that it was the second prince who had created the 8th Squad. This was information Diana didn't want to know, so she pretended not to hear it. The girl turned her head and spoke loudly so that the Lord could not shout her down. However, Lauren gave her many names and even admitted that her boss was playing a significant role in this conspiracy. The Lord was glad that now the girl knew too much, and he was not alone in a dangerous situation. Now they were real accomplices, and no matter what happened, he would not die alone. Diana had intended to find a way to live in peace, but now her dreams were put to an end. She didn't understand why at some point she decided to choose her own grave and get to hell. Until the evening, she still had a small hope for a quiet life in the palace. However, even in her worst nightmares, she never thought that she would experience something so shameful that she would want to die. The boys had overcome so much that Diana had a fever in the evening due to excitement. The Lord told everything without concealment because it was better to have information that was already known. He told this only because the boys were now in the imperial palace. The Lord added that anyone can come to them with a smile on their face, but it could be a deception. Diana realized that even if she knew everything, she simply didn't have the strength to do anything. The girl knew that if she was told to die, she would just have to cry and agree with it. Kels admitted that he was tired and didn't understand anything, so he lay down on the girl's lap to rest. Diana and Lauren were even jealous that the guy didn't bother his head with all these things. The girl was thinking about running away because she believed that Kels would not die even if he did not become the young master. She dismissed these delusional thoughts and understood why they told her not to be alone during her illness. She didn't like being sick and suffering alone, and besides, the girl couldn't change anything. As a child, when Diana was sick, her mother would come and stroke her head. Her older brother's clothes became too small for him, so they didn't even have money for medicine. Mom believed that Diana was strong and would recover on her own, so she just asked her to be patient. The girl did not understand why, at such a difficult moment, she also remembered her childhood. The maids here were very arrogant, so the girl didn't even want to call them for medicine. She was upset that even after arriving at the imperial palace, she could not escape trouble. All Diana could think about was that this was how she would spend her whole life. The girl heard footsteps and noticed Kels, apologizing to him for disturbing him with her sighs. She promised that she would cover her mouth with a pillow and try to be quieter. However, the guy admitted that it was not the noise that worried him, but the fact that Diana was in pain. The girl didn't like it at all either, but she couldn't do anything about it. Kels was new to her illness and didn't understand why she was having such a hard time. The guy carefully touched the girl's pale face and realized that she was very hot. After that, he wrapped her body in a thin sheet and slowly lifted her out of the bed. He laid Diana on the other end of the bed, and he lay down next to her, even though she forbade him to do so. And now the girl didn't even have the strength to lift a finger, let alone throw him out. Diana explained that she was shaking not because of fear, but because of the extreme cold. She was very hot, so it seemed to her that everything around her was much colder. Kels didn't know how to help her, so he just hugged her and pulled her closer to him. He hoped it would help control her body temperature and fear. Diana realized that the guy was saying something strange again, but she didn't dare ask the question that interested her. She just raised her head and looked at the young man as if she was seeing him for the first time. Although she didn't want to drink, for some reason her mouth became dry and then she sneezed. Kels gently patted her back to ease the pain and help her breathe normally. Diana realized that they were constantly changing places, and now she was a little sick and weak. One day, when she had just started her service, she became very ill. Then she was severely scolded for this offense, but the girl only laughed at the fact that illness is a sin. So when she fell ill at the front from exhaustion, she decided to escape for a while and take care of herself first. Taking care of her body was her responsibility, so the girl thought it was better to be sick alone. The young people admitted that they were very good together, although Diana understood that it shouldn't be that way. She attributed her condition only to the fact that they were now in the imperial palace. Kels could hear his own heart and hers growing faster and louder. He told Diana everything he had just heard in the palace, including the maids' conversation about themselves. The maids remarked on the handsome young man with black hair, making Diana proud of her work. However, they then moved from discussing his appearance to what they would like to do with him. Kels was saying these words he shouldn't have heard, so Diana tried to cover his ears. The guy asked her to explain the meaning of unfamiliar words to him, but the girl couldn't do it. She was incredibly embarrassed and simply couldn't allow herself to talk about it now. Diana realized that the imperial palace was a terrible place where the most dissolute and corrupt people were gathered. Only now did the girl realize that in the future, she would also have to deal with the hero's sex education. She had a lot of work to do.